president of Young Americans for Liberty, the USC chapter.
And I'm Nick Solari, and I'm the treasurer of the student chapter of YAL here at USC.
So basically, we just wanted to help the Ayn Rand Institute sponsor today's event because we feel free speech is an important issue, especially on the contemporary college campus. College is obviously sort of a place for learning new ideas, so free speech is an important element to the college campus.
Exactly. As a Center for Education, we just wanted to make sure that open discourse was as much a part of the experience as a professor's lecture. And I'm really looking forward to tonight. It should be a great time.
Hi, so we're here at USC for a free speech event, and to my left is Colin Moriarty. He's I would call him a YouTube sensation, but he can speak for himself. This is I think this is going to be a really cool event. Dave Rubin will be here, host of the Rubin Report, and we're really looking forward to a great conversation on free speech. I actually think this will be a super cool audience that is really engaged in the issues. I think these are people who want to learn about this issue, learn about what's going on, and learn about people who are on the front lines of debates about free speech, like Colin. So let me turn it over to Colin. Give him a moment to say a couple things. So
I mean, it's good to be at USC or at any college campus in the United States because, I graduated college at Northeastern 10 years ago, and I feel like college campuses today are unrecognizable. At least that's what you read online, and you see videos and you see protests, the stuff that was going on at Yale, with the Halloween costume, for instance. I want to really encourage people to explore difficult ideas, to have, difficult conversations, and really consider both sides of the argument, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different sides of the argument, and not shut anything out, not shut anything down, even these difficult things, these maybe even offensive things. We don't want to offend anyone. So I'm so happy to be here at USC. I'm so honored that you guys invited me to be here, and I really think we're going to have a great time.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. It's good to be here. I understand we're at some sort of alt-right, far-right meeting. Is that correct? Some sort of white supremacy thing. We're looking forward to it, and I have to say, a nice diverse group, considering. This is very exciting. I was supposed to speak, actually, at USC a couple weeks ago, and they couldn't secure it or something, apparently, because of my past controversial statements. And I just want to so let me just get it out of the way right to start. I do, and I really mean this, I really do believe that Sega Genesis is better than Super Nintendo. And I don't care what any of you think. I stand by that. All right. This is very exciting. Okay, so free speech, but before I begin real quick, the university did give me a list of topics that we're allowed to talk about. So let's see what we got here. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about free speech, and we'll take some questions from you guys at the end. So first I want to kick it to you guys, and let's just talk about the basics of free speech at the moment. The fact that we even have to do something like this these days seems sort of ridiculous. Just to, I have a feeling we're not going to say anything that controversial here. Maybe we can come up with something.
I might.
You might? You're ready? You radical right here.
I have a few jokes about women if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they ban you from Twitter yet?
No, give it time.
Give it time, give it time. So, all right, well, actually, that's a good place to start with this. So let's start with Colin. You tweeted one of the most offensive things I've ever read in my entire life. I don't want to butcher it for you. What was the exact tweet?
I think it was, peace and quiet, hashtag a day without a woman.
Pretty offensive, right? I mean, pretty offensive. Yeah, he's freaking out. So you tweet this, gets, a couple thousand retweets, then the outrage brigade jumps in.
Yes. I come from, or I hailed from, the very liberal, comically liberal video game industry. Since I was 18, I was writing professionally, and when I graduated college at 22, I got a full-time job, and I ascended the ranks to senior editor at IGN, which is the biggest video game website in the world, and then left to do some stuff with my friends on YouTube called Kinda Funny. And when I tweeted, oh, thank you. I don't work there anymore. When I
took all their Patreon money.
So when I tweeted out the joke, it was, I had built up a reputation in the gaming industry, especially because I was a bigger name in media, of being conservative, openly conservative and openly libertarian. It was basically just an opportunity to jump on me. No one was offended by the joke. The joke's funny. The joke's also kind of true. And so yeah, so that's really kind of my, it's a very nascent journey actually right now. That's when you and I met and became BFFs and all that. So yeah, scary kind of times that we live in right now.
Yeah, so basically for those of you playing along at home, Colin ultimately sort of had to or voluntarily stepped down from the company that you helped create. Now, you don't have a problem with that, with the Outrage Brigade, right? They're entitled to use their free speech to counter your free speech. That's what it's all about.
Sure.
But there is some sort of risk, right, in this endless fight over trying to shame and silence everybody?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's risks. The big risk is self-censorship, I think, and I mean, we're living in a culture that is offended by everything. And I don't think that that's some, that people are more sensitive than they were in the olden days. I think there's a whole lot behind this that has to do with the prevalent ideas in the culture and a lot of the ways that people, things that college kids are taught, and they maybe get into that more. But I mean, think about, so let's move, or if you don't mind, I'll move from Colin's situation, which was bad, and there's lots to say about Colin's situation and the way he dealt with it in particular, which I'd love to talk about more because I think he's a model of exactly what you do in a situation like this. But let's move to sort of college, what's happening in college campuses. I mean, we've seen attacks on speakers. The most recent one, Heather McDonald, right, at Claremont McKenna, for writing a book, War on Cops. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think she's a very bright person. I'm going to say thumbs up on that. Somebody's saying thumbs down, and anytime somebody says thumbs down, I automatically will say thumbs up. But she's bright, right? That's the bottom line. And so think about, like, there's a protest. They won't let people in the building, and the attitude basically is you're opposing a kind of orthodoxy that's developed in this culture, and we're going to shut you down. We don't want to hear from you at all. And we've moved beyond the kind of offensive, outrage to now, physical intrusions of people's speech and shutting people down. And so if you think about what's the combined effect of all of that, who in their right mind, who's not as courageous as somebody like Heather McDonald, is going to challenge the arguments that the Black Lives Matter movement are making, or any other movement? And that's not to take a side in the issue. I mean, we could talk about it if we want to, but it doesn't ultimately matter. The issue is we need to think about claims that are being made in the society that are fundamental and important to our political system, to our rights, and we need to be able to hear from people with different perspectives. And if we have this view that we're going to shame a guy like Colin and try to intimidate him, and then everybody apologizes, of course, not you, thankfully, and then we're going to physically block people for speaking, we're going to get to a point where orthodoxy takes over. Everybody knows I'm not going to take a risk about that. I'm not going to risk losing my job. I'm not going to risk being attacked. I'm not going to risk alienating my coworkers and being alienated from them. And that's how free speech dies.
So with that in mind, we're at a college right now. I realize that we didn't issue any trigger warnings before we started this thing. So just FYI, behind that door over there is a room full of puppies. If we say anything that offends you, you can roll around with some puppies, then come out when you're ready. So you make a couple interesting points there, because one of the things that happened after your little fiasco was that the International Business Times, this is a legit, or supposedly legit, news organization, they wrote an article about your tweet, and they called it racist. Could you repeat the tweet again? Because maybe I'm a little slow.
It's peace and quiet, hashtag a day without a woman.
Yeah.
Which is sexist maybe, but certainly not racist. Yeah, that was the disappointing thing about it, was everyone, they couldn't even keep their words together at this point. This is what we were talking about when we had dinner the other night, which was, like, they're so eager to criticize it. They want to crucify you, right? And so they just, it was probably an honest mistake, but this guy probably writes these stories every day about how someone's offending something, so he's like, oh, it's a racist tweet. And the unfortunate thing is that was up for 24 hours. That's going to live in, like, LexisNexis and on Google Cache and stuff forever. And that's not true. I've never said anything racist. And I would contend that my tweet wasn't even sexist. And back to your original point, like I think that it's totally appropriate for people to be upset about what I said, right? Not every joke's funny. It wasn't even really a funny joke. It's like a Married with Children joke. It's a shitty, All in the Family joke. Like that's fine, but to me, it's about degrees and kind of having commensurate kind of responses. They came out to destroy me, and it was agenda driven because of all the things I had said and done. I mean, I was writing about political correctness in video games and doing videos about them and protecting the freedom of expression when games like 6 Days in Fallujah, which was about the Iraq War, was canceled. Well into development, millions of dollars spent on it because it was offensive, because it was too current. And I was the one in 2010, 2011, 2012 writing about this stuff. So I had a target on my back for a long time, and that's why I know that it was agenda driven. But to the point we were making before, we saw the evidence of this silence and this chilling effect in the election. Everyone was under this illusion that Donald Trump had no chance because people were afraid to admit that they supported him. Because if they did, they would be labeled a bigot or a sexist or a Nazi or they're Richard Spencer's best friend or whatever it happens to be. And if you lop California off and just count the other 49 states, Donald Trump would have comfortably won the popular vote in addition to winning the electoral vote. And so we saw that play out in our own polity. We see that with the idea of the shy Tory in Britain. This idea that Brexit had no chance, that the conservative movement in Britain with Theresa May had no chance because everyone's afraid to talk or be honest. If you're not part of the PC brigade, they don't want to hear from you. And so the chilling effect is real.
Yeah, so those words, the racist, bigot, homophobe, Islamophobe, all of these words, at this point they're creating a backlash now. And what I don't want to see is I don't want actual bigotry out there. You have a right to say, you actually have a right to be a bigot too. You can't harm somebody, but you have a private right to do that, even if we find it reprehensible or we don't like it. What do we do to get rid of the power that these words have over us? Because that's what I think a lot of these guys are dealing with. Because I get emails every day from college kids who are like, I'm just afraid to say what I think, or I don't want to tell my professor what I think, or I posted something and now my mom won't talk to me, like all this. I wish that was my problem. What?
Yeah, so
how do we take the power away from those words, basically?
I mean, part of what we'd have to do ultimately is we have to embrace the idea of reason and individualism, and we have to be willing to think and evaluate things. And I think fundamentally what's going on behind all of this is a real attack on what I would call the Enlightenment values of reason and individualism, the idea that we can all think, we can formulate our own conclusions, we're all in charge of our own destiny, the pursuit of happiness, right? That's in the Declaration of Independence. It's part of this whole idea that we're individuals and we pursue our own destiny. We all decide what is true. It doesn't mean whatever comes out of our head is true. It does mean we have to have the right to think, evaluate the world, and really figure out what is true. Against that, you have a kind of, historically and philosophically speaking, there's a kind of counter-Enlightenment trend. It's against the idea of reason, it's against the idea of individualism, and in favor of this idea of that leads to a sort of emotionalism. To be more concrete about it, you see this in multiculturalism, you see this in the intersectionality now. There's many different manifestations of this idea. You can see it in collectivism. I think it's breeding a kind of tribalism, right? And that you're seeing on both sides, in my view. Like you saw it in what we typically refer to as PC, is this idea that in multiculturalism, it's this idea that we are all separated by and you can fill in the blank, our skin color, our race, our ethnicity, our sex, our national origin, our religion, on and on and on. And you can really find this in if you actually read the philosophers who are behind this, they really believe that all of these groups are isolated from one another. They're in a kind of inherent warfare against one another, and they simply can't talk to each other. There's a gulf between them. There is no ability to speak to one another, which is really it's a horrifying idea, because when you reject the idea that we can reason with one another, that I can understand your situation, that we can come to a mutual agreement about what the facts are and what is true, if you reject that, the only thing left is force. The only thing left is this kind of intersectional conflict. And to circle back to the whole Trump phenomenon, part of the reason I think that people didn't see that is they didn't want to see it, first of all. They didn't want to, and if you look at this as sort of the leftist media, although I'm not a huge fan of defining this as left-right, but we can talk about that. It's this idea that, you know, we can sort of control the debate. We can order people to live their lives in a particular way, and there'll be no blowback from that whatsoever. And I think what you saw with the Trump election is a whole lot of people, number one, getting really pissed off at the idea that they're being ordered to conform or be intimidated into living a particular type of lifestyle. Even if it's a lifestyle I disagree with and think is stupid, they have a right to live it that way. But it's also this idea that inherently our identity is part of some group, right? And you got to find some group. And I think what we saw during the Trump election was, okay, look, if collectivism or tribalism is really the rule, my group is going to be white middle-class people, and that guy speaks for me, and I'm not going to be on the bottom, I'm going to be on the top. And I mean, that's a horrifying cycle. That's tribal warfare, ultimately. And we really got to break through this, and we really have to, you know, confidently defend the idea that, look, truth is the ultimate arbiter. Reason is the ultimate arbiter. We've got to talk about this. We've got to be able to rely on our ability to talk, our ability to think, and our ability to solve our disputes peacefully.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that what it leaves you with, if you don't use those things, is that what it leaves you with is violence. If you've pinned all of your intellectual opponents into a box and, well, everyone I disagree with is a racist or a bigot or a homophobe. I mean, we saw this happen on Inauguration Day when Richard Spencer, who's the alt-right guy, who I probably disagree with on 99% of the issues out there, the guy got punched, and a ton of people were thrilled about it, you know, and saying, well, you should be out there punching Nazis like we're in Indiana Jones. And this is not the right response.
No, it's not. And by the way, just as an aside, that's the person I want you to interview most on your show. I've only listened to him speak once. I found a radio interview with him, and I'm like, I didn't know anything about him. I'm like, this guy is bizarre. I'd love to hear you pick him apart.
Well, thank you for mentioning that publicly. That won't put me under any Okay.
But yeah, so the Richard Spencer thing, and particularly what happened in D.C. Under with the inauguration, I thought was it was awful. Not only what happened, but the reaction to it, because you can't let things like this occur and have people have this random definition of what a Nazi is or what a fascist is. I mean, a good example is these anti-fascist guys that are so proud and so clever that they wear masks because they're pussies. And what basically happens is that they are the ones that define the battle. They're the ones that define the targets. And I'm concerned about that because it's funny, you know, when you don't read history and you don't know what you're talking about, you don't realize that you are acting like brown shirts. And these are the tactics that the Nazis, before they came to power in the mid-20s and late 20s, particularly when Hitler got out of prison, these are the tactics that the brown shirt fascists use to silence people. The anti-fascists are acting like fascists. And as the old saying goes, fascism will come to America under the name of anti-fascism. So I am concerned about the definitions. And that's why I go back to square one. I go back to the base. And I say, with free speech, anything goes. With the ability to be right or wrong, anything goes. It goes back to the argument we had about the Confederate flag, or even someone had asked me about, can a person fly a swastika outside their house? I'm like, yeah, of course. It's in bad taste. You're able to ridicule them. Mm-hmm. I don't think you're allowed to go pull it down. You're allowed to write a story about them. You're allowed to put news vans outside their house and shame them if you want. But that's that person's right. And it's the same argument that was having with the Confederate flag, where my stance was, this is a deplorable symbol of slavery and of traitors. But if you want to fly it, more power to you, because we can't begin to define what is offensive and then expect that that's not going to blow back on us one day as well, when the reasonable people that are being called fascists are now fascists in the minds and in the hearts of the very brave ninja suit wearing people that go to these things.
Right, and by the way, you know, the whole thing happened with the Confederate flag, and the resolution was that TV Land took Dukes of Hazzard reruns off. Literally, that's what happened. I mean, that, you know, as if this is protecting an idea.
Suddenly it's offensive to everyone, by the way. The Civil War ends at Appomattox in April 1865. Reconstruction ends 1876. Jim Crow goes on until the Civil Rights Act, and then and segregation and Brown versus Board, and then 50 years later, after that, now it's offensive.
Yeah.
I mean, and that goes back to what you were saying, which was just the definitions of what is offensive. Why is everyone offended by everything? Why does it matter? You know, if my neighbor wants to fly a Confederate flag, if I live in Alabama and he wants to fly a Confederate flag, is it really affecting my life? Is it really worth, like, is that the hill I want to die on? I'd rather die on the hill of absolute expression, absolute freedom, a more libertarian view of society, live and let live, don't hurt anyone. A symbol's not going to hurt someone. If you see a Confederate flag and you start breaking down in tears, I hate to tell you, that's your problem, not the person with the Confederate flag.
You would not be a good college professor.
which is funny, because that was what I was going to do before I got into the video game industry. So I think I veered
Can I
left.
just chime in
Yeah.
a couple of quick points? So I agree with a lot of what Colin said, definitely, and there's no question on the issue of rights. You definitely have the rights to fly the Confederate flag, to be a Nazi. Definitely, it was horrifying what happened to Richard Spencer. But I want to, let me give my view of what's particularly bad about this. So you talked about the idea of defining what's offensive. I do think we could define what's offensive. I mean, leave aside, it's a context-based thing. It would take a lot of discussion and debate. But notice that when you punch a Nazi, what that says ultimately, or punch anybody, right? Attack Milo, attack Charles Murray, attack Heather McDonald. What you're saying essentially is the idea of defending offensiveness or thinking about this is off the table entirely. Like, we're not even going near that anymore. And I have the right effectively to define everything. Why? Because I'm willing to attack you. I'm willing to use force against you to shut you up. That is, I mean, it's as anti-reason, anti-rational as it can possibly get. We can have a debate about what's offensive, and people can go their separate ways. I mean, the right of association is all about the idea that, look, maybe I think that your joke was sexist, and I don't, by the way. I think it was a cool joke, but especially living in a family of all women, I kind of appreciate that. But leaving that aside, I mean, we could debate that, but as soon as you allow this idea of punching a Nazi is okay, that's off the table now. There's no more debate. And it's whoever has the greater ability to use force wins. That is fascism. That is statism. And that's really what we need to be opposing.
I agree with you, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dave. No. I agree with you in the sense that when we go down that line, and it allows people to, like I said, identify who the fascists are, identify who the Nazis are. And it to the point we were making earlier, it then withdraws those bad people, and some of them are, in my mind, bad people or with bad ideas. I don't think Richard Spencer has good ideas at all. I think he's a maniac. But he has a right to be.
I have to interview this guy?
Yeah.
You're telling me? Yeah, thanks.
I'm sorry, did I ruin that for you? Yeah, I feel like, Richard Spencer speaking is the biggest thing that can get Richard Spencer to shut up. So the thing with Milo, before all the stuff came out with him with what was going on in Berkeley, what would hurt Milo the most is if no one showed up. Yeah. What would have hurt Milo's ego the most is if that place was empty and everyone went about their business and about their lives. And now Ann Coulter, I think, is going to Berkeley soon as well, and I cringe just thinking about what's going to go on with her. Yeah. These people will inevitably, if their ideas are bad and they're allowed to talk long enough, they will hang themselves. Yeah. So I don't understand why everyone's so afraid of these bad ideas. Don't be afraid of them. Shine the brightest light you possibly can on them and show everyone what they're all about, and then no one will be interested in listening to them anymore. You just feed them and you feed their power. Milo probably gained many hundreds of thousands of Facebook followers and views on his videos and all those kinds of things based on that. And people, similar to what you're talking about with Trump, a vote for Trump for a lot of people wasn't just a vote for his policies, because no one even knows what he feels about anything. But it was a vote against the idea of, well, you're telling me I should feel a certain way and I'm not going to. And if you keep putting people in a box like that, and putting people in a corner like that, it's going to backfire over and over again, which is why I feel like the more people go at Trump now, the more likely he's going to win in 2020.
Yeah, so I'm glad that Milo was brought up, because I'm friends with him. I've had him on my show. He says things that I find reprehensible. On my show, he refused to make the distinction between the doctrine of Islam as a set of ideas and Muslims as people. And I even tried to, I said, Milo, you're making a real mistake there. He said, I don't want your help here. This is what I believe, so be it. What's the role for people like him? For people that just throw out some incendiary stuff? Because what I've noticed is that when I was at UCLA with him, that he says a lot of over-the-top stuff, and yet there's also a lot of truth there. And what he does is, by throwing out that bomb, it creates fertile ground for people to hear some other ideas. So then maybe they'll get to a more calm, nuanced conversation that I'm having. But what do we do about those people?
No, I think you're definitely onto something. And my initial view of Milo was that he was a crackpot and he had nothing good to say. And then I actually paid a little more attention to it, and I realized, all right, this guy actually is intelligent and articulate. So some of what he says is true, and some of what he says is crap, I would say. He says it in a very interesting way, so he's entertaining. He's a classic provocateur, right? And so the role of a guy like that, to the extent you can talk about roles of people like that, is he's there to sort of break through the orthodoxy and the self-imposed silence on certain things and speak the truth, and and no matter who it pisses off. And a lot of what he says about Islam and about what's going on in Muslim countries and Sharia, it is true, right? So it's worth having a guy who has the courage, let's say, or just wants to make himself into a star, out there sort of breaking through those taboos. I look at him very much like I look at Charlie Hebdo. I mean, they were criticizing, they were actually ecumenical. They criticized every religion. And I'm an atheist, right? So I think we should criticize religion. I think that's a conversation we need to have. And you have to have people who are really willing to push the limit and willing to go out and say, let's make fun of these people and see what happens, because it'll make other people a little more comfortable. Actually, then the smarter people will come in and they'll actually have discussions, and we can debate with these guys. As Colin put it, the best thing, you really are worried about something like Robert Spencer or the stupid things that Milo says, either let him talk until he says something stupid, or preferably debate with him or just rebut his points. It's not that hard. It is not hard to rebut the racism of a Richard Spencer. It really is not, unless you deep down secretly agree in some sense with what Richard Spencer is saying, right? And if you really think we're all defined by our race, right, and our sex and our class, et cetera, which is what the multiculturalists do, if I were them, I would be afraid of Richard Spencer, because I would recognize that guy's actually saying something that, I hate to admit it, there's a truth to it in my view, right? And I don't know how the hell to rebut him. I would be terrified of that.
What about the platforming of bad ideas? Because if we can all agree, I thank you for having publicly said that I should have him on the show. But if I was to have him on the show, a certain amount of people would say, you see, Rubin's platforming a white supremacist or whatever it is, and that then, I suspect I know your answer, you can't give him an inch.
No, you can't give them an inch, and it's important, that's what I love about your show, and why I actually hate the criticism of your show, where people, I know you personally, you're my friend, so I know how hard you try to get disparate voices, the very liberal voices, for instance, or very conservative voices. They don't want to be on the show because they too are afraid. So that's one of the great things. If you could get a Richard Spencer on your show, that would be a huge boon. We should all know what he says, so we can have it in our minds. Instead of him being a cartoon character, we can know that he literally is a cartoon character because of what he says, as opposed to what the media, which lies about everything, tells you anyway. To me, there's certain things that we have to be worried about with this. People don't deserve or are owed a platform, but they shouldn't. People shouldn't be afraid of being wrong, and I'm not talking about in terms of the context of someone extreme like a Richard Spencer or someone extreme like a Noam Chomsky or something. I'm talking about people in the middle. I make mistakes all the time, and I've changed my mind many times on issues too by having conversations. As I've said to my audience many times, I was fervently pro-life when I was younger until I wasn't, because I had conversations in college when I was at Northeastern that changed my mind. Can you believe it? And suddenly I was like, wow, I was wrong. I totally didn't see it this way. I wouldn't have known if I refused to speak with you. And I think that for more moderate and more normal people, that has to be the way forward. Because otherwise, if there is no debate, then we really don't even know what's up and down or left or right. It is just, there isn't an objective truth about almost anything if you want to subjectively look at it. So I like discussion. I like talking to people and debating and knowing when I'm right and knowing when I'm wrong. And I love changing my mind too. But that requires study, that requires an open mind. And that's one of the things I'm afraid of when we're talking about the multiculturalism or kind of the isolating of people. The thing that gets me the most mad, and we had a great conversation about this over dinner, was that this mindset, this tribal mindset, alienates potential allies in various fights. if you look at the Venn diagram, right? Like I consider myself a conservative in terms of my fiscal policy and my size of government policy, but I consider myself a libertarian socially. I believe in the legalization of prostitution and the complete decriminalization of drugs. But somewhere in there, like I'm pro-gay marriage. But a liberal might look at me that's one of these hyper-liberals and be like, well, you believe in small government, so I have no interest in working with you on the pro-gay marriage thing. In other words, you're tainted. And I think that that's so destructive. We have all of these, none of us in here are going to agree on anything completely 100%, but can we find alliances that get us what we want, even if we have to leave some things on the table? Can we make an alliance together on the environment? Can we make an alliance together on green energy, even if I believe that the government taxes you too much and you believe the government doesn't tax you enough? But that's where we've come in the 21st century, and it is just not positive. It is destructive, and we bicker about all this bullshit while Rome burns, and it's quite disconcerting to me.
Yeah. For the record, I am so gay married. I'm so gay.
You are so gay married. That's true.
See how long I was waiting to say it, and then
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
I married a dude. All right, I'm down with gay marriage. Okay, there you go. Very exciting. People think it's so great. It's like,
Well, that's the thing you were talking about too. Is that
just having a good time?
And yeah, dude. Hey, do you, man? But.
By the way, you're not married, but if you were to get married, I would be okay with your traditional marriage.
Thank you, I appreciate the traditional marriage. I appreciate that.
It would be very boring with the girl talking the whole time and the whole thing.
She really doesn't.
Well,
stop.
you're married, I guess. Yeah, you.
But that goes to the point, right? We were just talking about this, and it goes back to the Oppression Olympics and all these kinds of things. Your status as a gay man is in 2017 irrelevant.
It's over
now to the people that you might as well be a far right conservative from Alabama or Mississippi to these people, because your battle's won.
Yeah.
You can get the fuck out now. And that is such a destructive way to look at it, because there are still fights that transgender rights or all these kinds of things that you could be an ally and an advisor on. Be like, this is how we did it. This is how we fought. But they don't care because you won, and now you're just, and because you talk to conservatives, oh God.
Yeah. Well,
now they don't want anything to do with you.
It's interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there's part of the reason for that is what they're looking for is victimhood status, because victimhood status gives you a kind of moral cachet in the society, and there are reasons for that. I'd pin it on altruism, the idea that we ought to sacrifice our lives and our interests to other people, and which is kind of a race to the bottom. But leaving that aside, we definitely have this kind of victim, oppression Olympics, and so once you're not a victim anymore, perceived as a victim, because you've found your way, or your group, so to speak, is now accepted, we need to find our other victims, right? And there's a way in which I think that breeds a kind of resentment toward you. Well, you've learned to live your life and you're being happy. Well, you're not a victim anymore, so why do I care about you? Because you're not a victim. And victimhood and the status of victimhood in this culture today gives people a moral standing, and a moral standing is a kind of path to power. It's a path to lording over other people, intimidating them, telling them to shut up, because after all, if you really accept the idea that the people who are on the bottom are the ones that are the most morally exalted, then somebody you have to fight to be in the oppression Olympics to be the person who is the worst off. And that's a whole moral issue and an ethical issue that we really need to think through. But I think that's kind of the dynamic that's going on.
By the way, I should give a shout out to my friend Faisal, who's here somewhere. Where are you? Who is the first? I think you came up with the Oppression Olympics, right? That wasn't you?
I'm an immigrant. I stole it from someone.
Oh, well. There you go. And he's honest. That's what I like. That's what I like. By the way, if you guys didn't catch it, I did a live stream with Faisal and Yasmin Mohammed, who's over there, and we did it today, and they are both ex-Muslims, and it gets to the root of sort of what we're talking about here, about the difference between collectivism and individualism, that you end up throwing away all of the counter voices. So in my case, well now, the gays got what they want, now we got to get rid of them. And by the way, if you don't think that's real, I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Gay Pride Parade in West Hollywood this year is canceled, and they're doing a protest march instead. Yeah, that's a lot of wasted foam for these people. I mean, that you can't march in foam. But I don't even care. I don't even care about the parade. But it brings up the bigger point of that you have to keep these people feeling that they're oppressed, so that you can sort of intersectionally grab onto some other things and then become a big group. And that's dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I think so. And what's so ironic to me about it is you have, a group of white people, right, in the United States that were brought up, young people, like a lot of people in this room, that were brought up by Gen X, very socially liberal, not like the baby boomer parents, not like the greatest generation. These people grew up very racially aware, very sexually aware, pushing the bounds of all those kinds of things. Their kids are even more socially liberal, even more accepting of differences in religion and ethnicities, and it's ironic that they're the ones that seem to be being targeted, being like, you guys are the enemy in a way, like you're not an ally. And I'm like, these people would die on many of these hills with you, and just because their skin color is different than you, or just because their sexual orientation or their gender identity is different than you, you're actually just alienating some of the greatest allies that you could possibly have. It's so strange. It's so antithetical to free thought, and it makes no sense. And that's one of the things that that gets me down with identity politics is, yes, there is a group of black people in the United States are historically, treated terribly, right? And this goes back to the 1600s, long before the United States was founded. And there's legitimate gripes there. And there are legitimate gripes with the gay community. There are legitimate gripes with the transgender community, the immigrant community, all those kinds of things. And hey, your greatest allies happen to be, in my opinion, this hyper-liberal millennial generation that you're judging based on their skin color, something that they could not control any more than you could. And that to me is very strange, because if we work together on these issues, we would solve many of them together. But again, it goes back to the tribalism you were talking about. It goes back to, you're either all in or you're not. If you are a white man, you cannot possibly identify with what I'm talking about. If you are a straight white man, you cannot possibly identify with what I'm talking about. And I beg to differ. Just because a person didn't live that experience doesn't mean that they can't empathize with you and they can't work to help solve that problem with you.
So, yeah, you can applaud that. So it's interesting, we've come, I don't know, maybe a half hour or so in, and we haven't mentioned the government at all, and we're doing something on free speech. Boo, the government, he has bad hair. The government, though, so first off, just for those that have no idea, can you just explain the difference between the First Amendment and free speech? What is the First Amendment? Let's do some one-on-one here.
The First Amendment is the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or of the press. It's got a lot more in there, but those are the relevant words. Essentially what it does is it prevents the government from infringing your right to free speech. There's a lot that one could say about that, but that's the essence of it, right? So it's a right that protects you against government censorship, if you want to put it as censorship, or government infringements of your right to free speech. Technically speaking, it doesn't apply to individuals, so it certainly doesn't say, for instance, to USC, you have to have these three guys and this event at USC. In fact, that would be a violation of USC's property rights, right? So we have to understand all rights as consistent with other rights. So and one of the great mistakes that's been made through the history, especially the last 50 years or so in the United States, is this idea that free speech or the First Amendment, your First Amendment rights, somehow trump other people's rights to property, that somehow they owe you a forum or they owe you a microphone, et cetera. And that really has a pernicious impact on our view of free speech, because it makes us think that free speech is conflicting with my property rights or my right just to say, I don't want to deal with you, Robert Spencer, get the hell out of my life. You can speak to crazy people if you want, but I'm not going to finance your speech. Now, I think the idea of free speech is a broader idea of, oftentimes these are used synonymously, but when we think about free speech, I think about it as the value of free speech. Like, what is it that free speech and the ability to think for myself means for me? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for us as human beings? And I mean, simply put, it's what defines us as human beings, not free speech as such, but thinking. Free thought, right? Our ability to come to our own conclusions in life and then to speak and communicate with other people. That's how I think about free speech. We are losing both of those. We are losing the value of free speech, and because we're losing the value of free speech, we are seeing attacks on the right to free speech by government, and then in a number of other different ways as well.
What's government doing at the moment that's an attack on free speech?
Oh, geez, what is government doing? I mean, campaign finance laws are a huge violation of free speech. One of the ways in which, I mean, we can talk about that if you want, but I think that's kind of off point. One of the ways in which government has a hugely negative impact on free speech on campus, on all of these campus controversies, is what's known as Title IX. And essentially it's an anti-discriminatory law, anti-discrimination law. And what it says, this is really oversimplified, but any school that gets government funds, which today is every school, because that applies to loans, anything, right? And all schools exist on Stafford loans, et cetera, all of the various loan programs, says that you can't discriminate against individuals on the basis of sex, race, et cetera, et cetera. Inherently, I mean, that's not a crazy idea, right? But here's what's happened in the last several years, I think about the last 5 to 10 years or so. They've expanded the definition of that to the idea of a hostile environment, which is a very vague term. And what you get then is if a university allows a hostile environment to subsist or exist on campus, it can be sued, or the individuals creating the hostile environment can be sued. The universities now are deathly afraid of losing their funding. So let's take one concrete example. I don't know how many people have heard of Laura Kipnis, right? Laura Kipnis is a Northwestern professor. She's an individualist feminist, really interesting person. I highly recommend people read her. She wrote a piece for Chronicle.
She's coming on the Rubin Report.
Oh, awesome. So that's good. She wrote a piece
right
for
after
the Chronicle.
Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
We're very excited.
She wrote a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Long story short, she essentially said the atmosphere about sex on campus is something like paranoia. Like we're just paranoid about the idea that like everybody's going to be raped and everybody is being sexually harassed. A couple of students brought Title IX complaints against her and the university. You've created a hostile environment by writing an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, not even a Northwestern publication, but I feel frightened and scared. She went through over a year-long investigation. You can read about it. It was hell. And she's now written a book about this and how Title IX is just corrupting higher education and creating this incentive for administrators that I think are already prone to being pussies, if I may use that term.
We're not going to say shit like that.
No,
here.
no.
Pussies, really? Pussies.
But really, administrations that are just afraid to offend anybody, giving them a financial incentive and a legal incentive now to clamp down on free speech. That, if you want to think about what's really going wrong on college campuses, that's the number one thing that I think is creating this atmosphere.
Yeah. Do you guys think that social media is adding to the lunacy here? I mean, we know that it directly affected you, but just this need, I was talking about it on the show earlier this week, this need to constantly have an opinion about everything. So of course, I'm a free speech absolutist myself. You should express your opinion as you see fit. But this need to constantly be right, this need to have to attack everybody all the time, that is then causing other people to silence themselves, which is sort of it's taking away a little bit of that social contract we have.
Yeah, I think. Well, they tried to strike me down. I just came back even more powerful. But I think there's a Star Wars reference in there somewhere. But yes, I think that social media has been destructive to free speech or lack thereof in many different ways, right? And you actually changed my mind on something when I remember when the first time we met when we were discussing specifically, I was talking about how everyone seems angry about everything. Social media really does seem to be a good gauge on what's going on in society. Really, that's not true. Like, it's an amplification tool. It's not. This isn't everyone. This isn't a poll of people. And you were right about that. But I think that yes, it goes back to the example I always use is when Gary Johnson, God rest his political soul. Yeah.
He's actually in Aleppo now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in Aleppo. Yeah. When I heard the Aleppo snafu and everyone went off, I was like, I guarantee you, 95% of the people on Twitter that were making fun of him have never fucking heard of Aleppo ever, and probably couldn't even find Syria on a map. Nonetheless, know what's going on there and all that kind of stuff. But they feel like that not only do they have to have an opinion, but they have to come down on you and they have to judge you and they have to try to destroy you. And it's that element of destruction, of personal destruction, that goes hand in hand with a person's ability to speak freely that I think was most salient to my experience, but also most scary in a lot of different ways. The example I always use, and I've used it with you, is the person, I think his name is something Sargent or something. I get his name wrong. He worked at Gawker. fuck Gawker. But he worked at Gawker, and he wrote that story outing the CFO of Condé Nast for no reason.
Yeah.
This man was married, or maybe still is. He has kids, gainfully employed, has done nothing wrong, was rendezvousing with a male prostitute. He was tangentially related to Tim Geithner, who was Treasury Secretary at the time, and the guy was basically trying to blackmail him into helping him out with something that had nothing even to do with the Treasury. And so Gawker got involved in it, and they ruined him. They published a story, ruined him professionally, ruined him personally. All that was their freedom of speech and their choice to do that. But why? And I think that's the other element we have to ask ourselves is, why? We can all say what we want to say, and I think it's important. I'm with you. I'm an absolutist with that kind of stuff. I'd rather have it all than nothing. But we have to also ask ourselves like what our own personal responsibility is in the things we say and do. And sometimes we're going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong. But on social media, when you're an egg on Twitter, or it's not an egg anymore. It's not an egg. You had to change your description on Twitter. I know. But it's a silhouette of some sort. When you don't put your name on there and all that kind of stuff, well, you still have that freedom of speech, not the governmental freedom of speech, but the freedom to say what you want to say. But it removes any sort of repercussions for saying what you want to say. And so people, I think, are not necessarily being more honest. They're just being assholes. And that's why, with my own experience, my gut instinct when all this stuff happened with me, Dave, and as you know, was I wanted to use this as a springboard to like fight back against social justice warriors, which is not even a term I even use really, or snowflakes, which is not a term I even use. I don't use these terms. But I resisted it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to actually use this platform to do something more positive, to try to add free speech in a more positive way, as opposed to, Ben Shapiro does a fantastic job of doing what I would otherwise have done, or you do a fantastic job. I don't need to add in that way. I don't need to add to the discourse. Putting my face, here I am in an auditorium, it's me, my name, you know who I am, and it's not anonymous, and it puts more weight behind that free speech. And so I think we have to kind of weigh all those different things as well. I think it's really important in regard to our discourse moving forward.
What do you think is the number one thing that we can do? Like, to me, none of this stuff, I'm not that old. Like, I was in college not that long ago, and none of this stuff was being talked about. There was, you could say whatever you want, you could joke about whatever you want. I smoked a lot of pot, that was good. It was what it was. Where these guys are now growing up in an atmosphere that doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be there is just this chilled effect. And every time that we've done one of these together, that seems to be the biggest question. How do we break out of this thing?
Yeah, so I'll make 2 points. One I've already made, probably ad nauseum. It's a battle of ideas. It really is. You've got to understand what it is that underlies free speech. And it's reason individualism. We have to be willing to stand up for the idea that we can think and we can come to, conclusions. We can understand the real world, and we are all individually entitled to do that. But leaving that aside, I'll say something I haven't said so far is, and I think Colin is a good example of what to do, right? So be unapologetic, right? Watch, and I don't know if I've already said this. I forget stuff because I'm old, but Colin obviously was on Dave's show after the infamous tweet, and Colin has a lot of good things to say about that. I encourage you to watch the show because I think his attitude is exactly right. It's, I'm not going to apologize for this, and screw you people if you don't like it. I will not apologize. I will not apologize for saying something that, are you kidding me? You got offended by that? And I don't buy that anybody is offended. I think you even said this. I didn't buy that anybody was offended by it either. It's completely stupid to be offended by this. Like, spend 15 seconds saying, I wouldn't say that, and then move on with your life. You have a life to pursue here, for crying out loud.
Presumably.
What's that?
They presumably have a life to
Yeah, presumably.
Twitter
well, they
changes your
should get
mind
a
on
life.
that.
But I mean, the way I would capture this point is, if we want to defend free speech, we have to be willing to speak up, and we have to be willing to do it confidently. We need moral confidence. And that means when people attack you for your ideas, that you respond by essentially saying, look, these are my ideas. I'm willing to debate them with you. I'm willing to think about them. But I'm not going to apologize for holding ideas if you're not going to show me what it is that's wrong with my ideas. The ultimate arbiter here is truth. And I'm sure as hell not going to be quiet because I'm saying something that challenges some orthodoxy that you all created that doesn't even make any goddamn sense. I mean, most of the stuff that I think emanates from the multiculturalist, intersectionality, identity politics world is complete bullshit. And we got to be willing to say that. We got to be willing to confidently say that and challenge the people. Look, if you think that all cops are racists, make the case for that. Don't just go after some woman who actually took the time to write a damn book on this and has facts, right? And maybe she's an incendiary kind of, writer, but for God's sake, she's intelligent. She laid out a case for it. Read the damn book and then make an argument against her. The idea that you're going to attack her or even shout her down, I find insane, and it should be treated as insane. On a college campus, especially the idea that people protest when somebody comes to college who has intelligent, basically informed views is completely crazy. And we ought to be willing to stand up and say, you guys are all infants and you're idiots for protesting this all. Go have a goddamn debate.
And to be clear, at the same time, you are defending their right to protest, and then you're saying you can...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the right to protest. It depends. I mean, on a college campus, it's up to the college campus, especially if it's a private university. They have the right to protest as long as the protest is peaceful, right? The riot at Berkeley, that was not peaceful. That's not a protest. That's a riot. Attacking Charles Murray that's mob violence. Silencing Charles Murray when he was trying to speak, that is not a proper protest. By all means, stand up, turn your back if you want. This is a big boy. He knows how to debate with people. When you start chanting and you drown him out, that is a physical intrusion and you're preventing him from speaking. When you form a human chain around the auditorium or whatever it is that Heather McDonald speaks at, that's a form of physical force. And basically, if you read the articles on this, you'll find that this was a concerted effort. It was a conspiracy to violate the property rights of the university. I think to violate the rights of Heather McDonald. They were banging on the windows. They had to whisk her off in like an unmarked car afterwards. That's mob violence. You're not allowed to do that. You want to protest, protest. Got to be peaceful. There's a difference between a peaceful protest and mob violence, and we absolutely have to understand the difference between them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you both... All right.
You'll allow it.
Yeah. You guys are very respectful. You clap one at a time. That's nice. I like that you both mentioned that we have to beat bad speech with more speech, because I noted that when I tweeted about this event, an anime Twitter fox or cat or something said, oh, you see, Rubin and Moriarty, they want their safe space. I immediately invited the fox to join us here tonight, and then the fox didn't respond.
Yep.
So
always, they never respond. Foxes can't talk.
But that really is to wrap this up, and then we'll do a Q&A, which I'm sure you guys want to get to. That really is what will win here. That no matter what someone says that you don't like, beat them with your speech. Don't silence them, and move forward in society.
And it goes back to what we've been saying the entire time, which is this fear that's built in, that's installed in polity, and that's installed in the marketplace of ideas. That things that sound real or that sound like, oh, we're dealing with a problem that exists, that doesn't actually exist. That sounds good and you're afraid to go against it. Let me give you a couple of examples. The 78-cent wage gap, not true. Between men and women. It's just not true. I want to make sure I repeat this so everyone hears it. There is not a wage gap between men and women in the United States that is anywhere near 78 cents. It might be less than 5 cents, and someone like Susanna House-Summers might say that it actually doesn't exist at all, and you can go read about that stuff. But it makes it, I'm sexist for saying that apparently. But I can just read the data and just know that it's actually just not true. But that's a lie. When equal pay day or whatever the hell they called on Twitter the other day, it's like everyone's saying, it's just fucking false. It's not true. Why are we lying? And we're letting these lies go on because everyone's afraid to say something about it. And I think that these particular examples are particularly destructive to sometimes fact and truth isn't convenient, and sometimes people have to realize that they're wrong and that the data is being misconstrued or whatever. If we don't have a foundation that we can all rely on, in which we can then fight, or not fight necessarily, but debate these ideas and kind of come to a conclusion, then how can we ever trust what anyone ever says? And when I see that pernicious, it's just a myth. It's not true. And so when I see stuff like that, it really bums me out because we know that it's not, we know everyone's reading the same data. We know everyone knows that that's not true. It's just a matter of they're afraid to say it because they're going to be called out. It reminds me too of An even more incendiary thing, but a true thing. What happened in Ferguson, the hands up, don't shoot thing comes from that. That's still being used. That didn't actually end up happening. That just wasn't, that's just, like when all the grand jury testimony and stuff came out, everyone was lying, none of that stuff happened the way it happened, but that is still the rallying cry. Because no one wants to talk about what actually happened there. And I'm not saying that what happened there is necessarily right or wrong. What I'm saying is there are actual facts that are being ignored, and if we can't talk at a foundation of facts, then what the hell are we talking at all for?
But those facts challenge a kind of intellectual paradigm that's been taken root for about a half century in this country. And I mean, you can see it in that it is identity politics. So to take either the Ferguson or the wage gap issue, if we don't maintain this fiction that there's this wage gap or whatever the arguments were about fiction, then we can't see women as victims and we can't see blacks as victims and we can't argue, and I'm oversimplifying the point here, and then we can't argue that America is an inherently oppressive nation. And if you want to make those arguments, you really want to convince people America is inherently oppressive, it has destroyed the lives of countless millions of people, which is utter nonsense, completely crazy nonsense, like the exact opposite of the truth. Doesn't mean the country is perfect. But if you really want that to be true, you have two options. You can, really, you only have one option. You can either live in your own fantasy world, or you can shut up the guy who is speaking truth. And they're choosing to shut up the guy who is speaking the truth. And it makes sense if you actually accept these ideas.
Just as a quick aside, it's just, I think we can all agree, it's just Orwellian.
Yeah.
Like the point that where we're getting now is like it's just wrong think. It's all these kinds of things. It's just it's all made. It's all catered towards a narrative, and you have got to resist it. It's incredible when you read some of this early pre-war sci-fi and even post-war sci-fi. You read Animal Farm, you read any of these things, and it's like how do these guys know? Or even, and I'm not trying to be promotional at all, but like even reading Atlas Shrugged or something like that, it's like how did you know? Like that and it's because it's actually obvious. It's actually human nature, and we have to resist it. And the hashtag resisting has to do with resisting Trump, but I think we have to just resist bullshit.
To wrap this whole thing up, I think one way we can kind of bring it into the world that you guys are all living in is even if you look at what's happening in the digital space, with YouTube, you just launched a new show on YouTube. What happened within a week of that, not related to you specifically, but the advertisers were, something like 40% of the advertisers dumped out of YouTube because they thought that some of their stuff was going on videos that they didn't like. And then that doesn't create censorship because YouTube's not stopping people from putting up videos that they want to. But ultimately, if you have to make a dime putting up your videos, you're going to self-censor yourself out. So that, again, goes to that chilling effect that we will take this all away from ourselves.
And this is why it goes all the way up, I think, and I think we can all agree, and I think a lot of people in this room can agree, it goes to the media as well. The media's complete complicity in this nonsense and this bullshit. And I know that there's good people out there, Glenn Greenwald and all these people doing really great work, but for every one of him, there are 25 people with an agenda. Wall Street Journal is writing about PewDiePie and writing about YouTube and all these kinds of things because they want to destroy him. And if people don't see that for what it is, I think it's blatantly obvious. We were talking about how there's a video game website that's terrible called Polygon that wrote recently about PewDiePie moving to Twitch, which is owned by Amazon. It's for people that don't know, it's a huge streaming service, a massive streaming service. There was actually a bidding war between Amazon and YouTube to acquire it. And Amazon won. And they were like, and I was a journalist, I know you reach out for people for comment, but they're like, look at all this bullshit that he said about Nazis and all this stuff. We reached out to Twitch to see what they think about that. And between the lines, it's trying to destroy the people that are taking hearts and minds and taking your attention. You don't want to. Who the fuck reads the newspaper anymore? You go and you read Politico, or you go and read Drudge, or you read whatever, and you kind of parse through the bullshit, or you go read the Wires, AP, and Reuters. But these people are under existential threat, and they're in their death throes, and that is why they are acting the way that they are acting. And it's the same way from the video game industry that I came from, and it's the same way in news and media. You're seeing it everywhere. Rubin Report is a threat to CNN. It might not be the biggest threat now, but they know. It's on the radar. All these shows, Young Turks, where you came from, all these people are a threat to the status quo.
Well, they're a threat to sanity, but that's a whole other issue. And on that note, give it up for these guys. All right, so I'm sure you guys have some questions, so let's have you guys exercise your right to free speech. I saw that hand first. There you go.
But only if you say nice things.
We have a mic, I think, right? So how are we doing the micing?
So just walk down and go to the mic.
Yeah, the mics are, yeah, down here.
This chair's a mess.
Yeah, that was. Sorry, we'll start right here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the talk tonight. In talking to friends who are doing hiring at tech startups or investment firms, they're really struggling with this fragility and victimhood in people that are recent graduates that are now applying for jobs. Universities have a responsibility to prepare people for the outside world and for the workforce. So how are we going to address that? Because the accusations of sexism, of safe spaces, doesn't translate to the professional world.
I think you're the most professional of the three of us here. So,
Yeah, by far.
It's a hard question. So before I worked at ARI, I worked at a nonprofit legal organization, and so I've been a lawyer for a long time. And over time, I started to see this trend of people who were, not willing to work as hard as we, were way back in the olden days. I didn't think they were as well educated, and it's a really difficult issue to deal with. So I have two thoughts on that. One is companies are going to have to start educating and training people. I really think that, and to broaden the point, we need a real challenge to higher education. We need a new kind of view of what it means to be educated. We need some competition with higher education because they're not doing the job. It's really hard. I'd love to see that. My next, or my final point on that is, my own view is a sort of hard-ass view. Grow up, kid, or get the F out of here and learn what work looks like, or take a hike. And I actually think people should treat people like that, and they'll learn very quickly that they need to learn how to work, how to deal with things that are slightly unpleasant, and basically, I hate to say it, but how to grow up. It's not true of all students, but I see it more and more these days.
Yeah, right here.
Thanks for coming. I'm a big fan of Colin. I tweet you all the time.
Thank you.
Oh, it's the anime Fox.
Oh, it's you.
How are you, Fox?
It's you.
You guys were talking about that more speech might be the answer. Where does this optimism come from? Since I would say the majority of news networks and the general opinion is actually more PC rather than more open to discussion.
I would say, for me at least, that I don't know if it's optimism as much as I don't see a choice. What would the alternative be?
Fine.
So, yeah.
Fuck off.
We have another foreigner, everybody. Yeah, we're Scottish?
English, mate.
English, so yeah. Or we could just turn the whole thing into a big rugby match. I mean, that could work. We can get to that concept, actually. But I think that generally, if you let people talk, you hit this earlier, but it's the way I try to interview people. If you let people talk, eventually, if they have bad ideas, they just start coming out. They just consistently will come out. And that's how you'll beat them. They will beat themselves. So I know it sucks related to the media because the mainstream media, especially the cable news channels, just blow. But I don't know that there's an alternative that makes sense. Do either one of you guys?
I mean, I think I'm in agreement with you that I like a good sports analogy. And I grew up playing hockey, and we would have free shoot at the end of every practice, and I was a goalie. And if you shot at me 3 times, there's a good chance that I would probably save all 3 pucks. But if you shot at me like 50 times, you'd probably get like maybe 7 through in practice. And then if you kept shooting at me, I'd get more and more tired, and there would be more and more pucks I got through. And what I mean by that is that if you just keep talking and you don't shut up, and there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of discussion and all that kind of stuff, it's just a math equation. If you limit it to just the 3 major absolutely awful cable news networks, or you limit it to Vox and all this, BuzzFeed and all this fucking garbage, then that's a problem. But if you open it up and democratize it in a way, then that's great. And so I think that it's just a math equation. I'm optimistic actually about it simply because there's just more of us than there are of them. It's just that we haven't spoken yet. I don't believe in any reality in which the PC police and the people that are whining and bitching about everything are the majority. I do not believe that for 1 second. A lot of people have been cowed into feeling that way, and the people that really in their hearts feel that everyone and everything and everybody is oppressed in every single way, they're a minority, and we, by shouting at them and shouting loudly, they will shut up. So.
Can I add one quick thing?
Sure.
So 2.2 reasons for optimism. One, or three actually. One, the truth does come out over time, and we wouldn't be living in this society if it didn't, if you think of the scope of world history. Number two, one reason for optimism, all of you guys are here, and we've had many more of these events, and we get good people coming to these things who are asking good questions like this. And so I really think I agree with Colin. I think that the bad people, so to speak, are a vocal minority who are in effect cowing the rest of us to remain silent. You have to get courage, moral courage, and speak up. The final thing I'll say is, so these two guys are a reason for optimism, because look at what they've done. So both of them left jobs that they weren't satisfied with. They said, screw you. They went off. They did their own thing. They're being funded by Patreon and other people who are seeing that what they're doing is valuable. They're providing competition to, let's call it the mainstream media. I mean, I'll put it this way: capitalism. Capitalism is an awesome thing. We still have, mostly capitalism in this country. What it ultimately means is the freedom to do what you want and to convince other people to fund your ventures. And there are enough smart people out there who will. And these guys are examples of that.
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of the Rubin report.
Thanks.
On the show. And I was following the show back when I was in India before I came to the United States, and you've got a lot of fans.
Oh, thanks.
And my first question is that I saw your video about how people stop needing to act like how people stop needing to act like they know everything. And on the comment section in that video, you mentioned that since the video came out before the Syria strikes, you weren't able to kind of like include your views on that. So my first question would be, what were your views on that? And secondly, my other question is that a lot of people today, to me, seem to not know the difference between ideas having rights and people having rights. So they think that if you criticize an idea they have, it is the same as criticizing them as a person. So, and I believe that kind of an attitude leads to a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of gives rise to a lot of the PC that we see today. So how do you exactly handle that in a public forum?
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words. Quickly, my friends Faisal and Yasmin, who are over there, they suffer from the second part of what you're talking about. That if you can't separate ideas from people, then you will just look at them and figure out, well, this is what they're supposed to think, and that's it. So that's the danger of collectivism, that you should only be judged by your thoughts and not the color of your skin and any of that stuff. Of course, everyone should know that. You should not be judged by your immutable characteristics. As to the first part, quickly on the Syria strike, basically, it goes to what we sort of ended this with, which is that I think very few people really have a sense of who to trust right now. So I don't really know what happened. Do I really trust that Trump got some message and then said, now I feel we have to do this? We've also dropped, somebody, I think I read, we've dropped something like 7,000 bombs on Syria. Nobody was really upset about that during the Obama years. So it is one of these things where, for me at least, it's like, I don't know everything about this, and it's hard figuring out who to trust in cases like this. That wasn't very rewarding, was it? Bomb the shit out of them, that's what I meant to say. Yeah.
No. Another thing was that a Democrat congresswoman from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard, she actually managed to even question them, like, what is that? What is the kind of like evidence we have? Was it an independent inquiry? The United Nations has definitely not set up any independent inquiry. So how can you rush to action? In fact, in 2013 there was a bigger chemical attack in Syria, and the Obama administration, for what it's false, did not have this knee-jerk reaction and just shoot themselves at them.
Yeah, well, we could go far down that rabbit hole, but I did see that thing with Tulsi Gabbard, and that's basically what I thought. I thought, wow, here's an elected official actually saying maybe we shouldn't trust the company line. I thought that was pretty good. She'll probably never be on CNN again, but there you go. All right, Rubin.
Colin Moriarty.
Yes.
You seem to express disdain for anonymity on like social media platforms.
Wait, to what? I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is not. You seem to express disdain for anonymity on like
Oh,
social
yeah.
media platforms.
You can actually say that word. I can never even say it. Good.
Do you just feel that it's not valid? It seems like it'd be used for groups like the Shy Tories and Trump supporters that would normally not speak.
Well, I think it's a result of that, though. I think being anonymous is fine. It's great if that's what you want to do, but I don't. It's not constructive because if everyone that supports Trump, the MAGA crew on Twitter, for instance, are all just ridiculous pictures of flags and eagles blowing shit up and stuff. I mean, that's great stuff, but then that's not. It makes it seem like it's a cartoon, or it makes it seem like it's a parody. Like the point is that that's a result of them being shamed into their position. The big thing that I talked about a lot is, I was born and raised on Long Island, which is a pretty conservative place right outside of New York City, that voted for Trump, and that surprised a lot of people. Like upstate New York and Long Island voted for Trump. The New York City voted for Clinton, and that's why she won New York. But when I see people shit all over Trump supporters and talk about how bad they are and how stupid they are and all that kind of stuff, and then I look at like some people in my family that voted for Trump that happen to have like master's degrees, or friends of mine or whatever, then that you can see in firsthand why they feel like they need to be anonymous, and that speaks to our culture of destructiveness, I think. I just had a conversation with a guy on Twitter recently about very polite conversation actually back and forth, where he was saying that like there's no rational reason to vote for Trump, right? And I was like, actually, there's a million rational reasons to vote for Trump. It depends on where you are and who you are. The coal miner in West Virginia, whose mine was shut down by the EPA and just wants his middle class lifestyle back, has 100% chance or reason to vote for Trump. That makes perfect sense. That is the most rational vote. But he's made into a villain, so you can expect that ex-coal miner is a Twitter egg. And so I guess what I'm saying is that anonymous is good. Anonymous sometimes protects people. We get information anonymously. But we need to be able to talk to each other with our faces and our names and have skin in the game and being willing to make sacrifices. When I left Kind of Funny, I left a very comfortable 6-figure salary to make a point. Like it wasn't like something like I just walked away and I was like, yeah, I'll just go do something else. I wanted to make a point, being like, I am comfortable. I own 20% of this wildly profitable company. I'm selling it back to them, and I'm walking away from my salary. And it's my face, and it's my name, and it's my burden to bear because I had something to say. But not everyone's in that position, and not everyone feels comfortable to be in that position, and that's not good. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
So you guys talked a lot about tribalism and collectivism and how they can be bad. And they've been pursued as ideologies mostly from the Marxist memes that have been around a long time. And that's one of my counterpoints is that you say bad ideas will hang themselves, but the Marxist memes and the collectivist results of those, feminism and other ideologies have stuck around for a long time. And Islam is also a bad meme that's stuck around for a long time. So the ideas are not hanging themselves. But my main question is, if you're against collectivism and tribalism, in your world, when you don't want to be a collectivist, how do you fight a collectivist? If the ideas aren't going to win, and the collectivists will team up and become a giant collective force against you, even as a minority, right? Because they've gone through this oppression Olympics thing, and because Americans, whites, tend to be altruistic. If we don't give the Marxists or the collectivists helicopter rides, how do we prevent the corruption of our society from those minorities and those bad means that stick around, from whatever means, whether it's ignorance or some other means?
You want to take that? Ultimately, the Marxist ideas have hung around in Islam, and I would say even Christianity, right? They're all based on an ethical foundation and an epistemological foundation that's wildly wrong and false in my view. And so I mentioned this before, the whole idea of all of these ideologies is that the individual should be subservient to the collective, which is just another way of saying he should sacrifice his life to the good of others. And that, now, it's a radical idea, and I think Ayn Rand is the only one who stands for the idea that that's evil and that instead we should be selfish and practice rational self-interest. But she's fighting 2,000 years of world history. And I mean, those ideas are not going to go away until we're willing to challenge that premise that the basic purpose of your life is to live for others. And what I'm talking about is an ethical commandment in a sense, not just, like, don't ever help other people because that's horrible. That's not the point. The point is that it's your ethical duty to live for others. That is at the core of Marxism. That's at the core of Christianity. I think it's probably at the core of Islam and all religions. And that's why those particular bad ideas that are based on that have stuck around for a long time. And there's more one could say about that. But you have to be willing to challenge those ideas. So my point is not bad ideas will always hang themselves. My point is I think the truth will come out over a long period of time. And you can look at this from a historical standpoint and recognize that if that weren't true, we would never have had the Enlightenment. We would never have had the scientific revolution. We would never have had America. That doesn't mean all of the truth comes out, and we still have to be fighting for good ideas. As far as what do you do about collectivism, I mean, you fight against it, stand proudly as an individual, say, I will not be forced to join some collective. My life is my own, and if you don't like it, piss off.
Yeah, and by the way, you can get on Twitter and do that too, and you can do it on YouTube and everywhere else. I mean, that, for all the things that we sort of complained about social media, like, that's the beauty of it, Yeah. Blog on Twitter, there you go.
I want to throw in too, real quick, that just, the point's taken that not all bad ideas die with a lot of daylight immediately, but I would disagree. I think the writing, Marxism has failed everywhere it's been attempted. So I think that, like, as a philosophy, it might have these ramifications that still exist today, but there's no successful Marxist story.
Yeah. But it's coming back in different forms. But I mean, I take your point. Like, so that is a good point. Like, with the fall of the Soviet Union, that was the end of Marxism as a viable philosophy. It wasn't the end of the ideas that underlie Marxism, and Marxism has now been transformed into identity politics. Now, I don't want to take up too much time explaining why that is. I can do that after to anybody who's interested. But I think that, and the reason these bad ideas keep coming back is more fundamental bad ideas. That's my only point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I work for a nonprofit organization affiliated with the university, and recently they hired 2 transgender people, and from that point on, the staff management required or asked everybody to change their email signatures, to change the business cards to reflect the pronouns, what our preferred pronouns are. I refused to do any of that. And
good for you.
Somebody mentioned that I could potentially be fired. So my question to the panel was, what are your thoughts on pronouns and how it applies to freedom of speech?
Well, I mean, you strike me as a lovely woman, and I don't see how. I mean, look, your reaction to that very silly joke shows it, that they're forcing this stuff. It's not about everyone. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you don't have a real major issue with trans people or the LGBT community or anything like that. But they're trying to just force all this stuff down our throats to the point where it's causing a backlash to it. You know how to write an email, you know how to sign your name. I'm pretty sure that that's probably how you should do it, and I certainly wouldn't tell you how to do it otherwise. As for what the school's policy is, or the organization's policy, I guess you got to try to change it. But again, there's no end to this thing. That's why when I talk about the regressive left, it's like, part of me believes they will just implode because they'll eat themselves. That's what they have to do. I've said on the show many times lately, one day they will come for Bernie. He is a rich white guy with 3 houses. And one day he will say something that is not okay with them. So a lot of this stuff, it will just kind of implode on itself, and just don't be held hostage by that stuff. You got to say something. I have no doubt you'll treat every trans person you know respectfully, but you probably can figure out how to sign your name on an email, and it'll be all right.
Yeah, and I give you credit for standing your ground. I think it's important because because I have no problem with transgender people. Identify as a fucking oak tree if you want. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. Whatever makes you happy is totally fine with me. But I feel like there's there's a lack of patience with this particular movement that I'm finding obnoxious. That like a person uses the wrong pronoun, for instance, when they're addressing someone, and they're just crucified for it. And it's like, dude, they're not a bigot. They're not trying to do anything. They don't even know. The dude is 65 years old. He doesn't even know. Like he's trying to be polite. There's no, in this fight for acceptance, which I think is a noble fight. If you want to be a transgender person, if you want to identify as a different gender, more power to you. I don't care. But it's like, it's very combative. Yeah. And it's like, it's really strange. At GDC, which is Game Developer Conference in San Francisco, I had already quit by the time it happened. Or no, it happened the week I quit. I just didn't go. And they had their badges, and it's like they had these things where you put on top of like, this is the pronouns you use, and I'm like, why is this relevant? Like I just don't understand. Like no one's trying to do anything here. It's just like if you walk up to a transgender woman and you call them a him, but it's not meant in an arrogant or insulting way, then that person will just correct you and just remember that next time. We don't have to have these. It's totally out of control, and we've reached peak out of control with trans race, but don't even get me on that.
I'm a transformer, actually. I've been working with the Autobot secretly. Yes?
Yeah, my name is Nicholas. I wanted to ask you, on my campus I experienced blatantly unconstitutional policies, free speech zone, I have to check in, get a badge, and I'm home to speak at certain times. Well, I challenged it in court. I sued it in court, and I won, but a lot of the backlash I got it was interesting because I was speaking on an issue that I feel was somewhat nonpartisan, maybe innocent. Animal rights. I was handing out leaflets about factory farming and such. Could be debatable, but a lot of the backlash I received was, "Hey, you're opening up the campus for the idea of bigotry, of hatred, and those who I disagree with, or maybe most people disagree with." But how do you respond to those people who hold this viewpoint that, hey, you're opening it up for hatred and for bigotry? Because it seems like there are benefits to engaging in dialogue with those you disagree with, and there are benefits to putting the spotlight on those you disagree with, etc. So I was just wondering how you respond to those.
I mean, this goes back to I think what we were talking about before, that reasonable discourse like yours is lost and muddled because of this fight for political correctness, or this fight to contain and constrain free speech and free thought. So what you're doing is noble. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with your movement, but you're not hurting anyone. It's not even a violence. It's not even out of the mainstream. A lot of people feel the way you feel, likely about the way animals are treated. But when we have to constrain it to like a little, you see them on the pictures on Twitter. Sometimes they're like 10 feet by 10 feet in fences. This is the free speech zone or whatever. This goes to people that are afraid to have those more difficult conversations you're talking about, which is why I think Dave and I, well, all of us really here are probably in agreement that, sometimes, I don't want to say violent rhetoric, but incendiary rhetoric or hateful rhetoric has a place in the discourse, because how do you know who the enemy is, or how do you know who has the bad ideas if you don't let them speak at all? And you were caught in the crossfire. And congratulations for fighting it in court. That's fucking awesome. I think that's actionable. See, like, this is a great example of how you fight and what you do. You do it in the courts, and so you won a victory for everybody.
Yeah, I would just add to that you need to point out that the idea that free speech equals bigotry is crazy. I mean, it's nuts, it's lunacy. It is the end of free speech. And if we end free speech on the grounds that free speech means bigotry, then we ought to just take the next step and say people being allowed to think for themselves is bigotry. It's just a flip side of saying we command, we decide what you think, and anything you think that bucks our view of the world is a form of bigotry, and we have the power to shut you up. That's totalitarianism. That is ultimately what leads to totalitarianism.
No.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Nice hat.
Thank you so much. Big fan of the Rubin reports, and thank you all for coming to the university tonight.
Thanks.
My question is, you guys have mentioned that there's this battle between the Enlightenment ideals of individualism and group identity politics, right? But when you look at the most socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods in America, a lot of the time they're really homogenous. So you look at the inner city of Chicago, not very diverse, and then look at Wisconsin and rural Michigan that won Trump the presidency, and also not very diverse by the same token. So I guess I can understand why somebody might see the world in terms of their group and in terms of these identity politics that you talked about tonight. And so how can you convince people of the Enlightenment ideals of individualism without resorting to pushing for diversity for the sake of diversity and pushing for multiculturalism?
I feel like
that's
your wheelhouse.
It's a hard question because, I mean, there's a whole lot wrapped up in that. I mean, you're right about that they're very homogenized neighborhoods and areas, and in a sense, sort of self-segregation. And it's an enormously difficult issue to figure out. And I would not say that I know the answer to why that is happening exactly. I could take a stab at different things. But one would be that tribalism is part of the human condition and has been around for a long time. The worst thing you can do, or racism is, and certainly we have a long and horrifying history of racism in this country. The worst thing that you can do to get rid of racism is enact laws that effectively create or make people aware of and have to take into account race. If you write racism into your laws, you're definitely not going to get rid of racism. There are all kinds of laws and policies that do that. Now, I don't think that that's the only thing going on here. I think this is a really difficult issue. Ultimately, I think what I would say is you have to make the argument that in fact we're individual human beings, that skin color and as Dave put it, immutable characteristics that are non-essential to our character, they don't control us. We have the ability to think for ourselves, and there's all kinds of examples of that through history, and you have to get to somebody that way. And if you really want to dig down into it, then you really have to start educating yourself about why there are these pockets of all black, all white, etc. But those are very complicated issues. I would say that, so the final point I would make is, and if the idea is we're not allowed to talk about them at all, we'll never solve them. So free speech is an absolute condition of figuring out what's going on and solving them. But be open-minded about it and recognize that, this is one of the reasons I don't really think of these issues as left versus right, because I think they're both wrong in important ways on these issues. So don't fall into the leftist or the rightist kind of camps on this. Really think hard about and study what's going on. But that's what we need free speech for.
All right. I wanted to thank you all for coming out here tonight, fighting the good fight for free speech and all that. Colin, I'm actually one of your Patreon supporters.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you for coming out tonight.
Appreciate you. I'm also on Patreon.
I'm subscribed to you now because of Colin, so I'm getting there. All right.
Fair enough.
What I was thinking about was that I know that in Europe there's more kind of broad hate speech laws, and America is kind of one of the very few countries in the world that has such broad protections for free speech. We have all sorts of very oppressive governments around the world. So my question is, what can you give us to kind of give us hope that we can fight the good fight for free speech, despite the fact that we might be the one country still fighting for this broad protection of free speech when it seems like the whole world is moving more in this other direction?
Yeah, well, first I would say the evidence isn't great that those free speech laws that they have in those countries are doing any good. I think actually there's evidence that they're doing a lot of harm. Look, the Holocaust happened. It actually did happen. But if you tell people they can't say that it didn't happen, well, then they start talking about it underground, and then it becomes sort of sexy and interesting to them, and then that's how it multiplies there. And then you add in Twitter frogs and everything else, and then it multiplies. It multiplies like gremlins or like Twitter frogs. And so I think that most of Europe right now, I think they're jealous. Look what just happened with this motion this Islamophobia motion that was just passed in Canada. It's not a binding law, but basically they've set the groundwork to say, here's a set of ideas that you can't talk about. That has nothing to do with what a free, pluralistic society would want to do. So I think for us, it's incredibly important that we just maintain understanding why freedom is important and why we have the First Amendment and the ability to speak freely. Because I think they're probably all jealous of us right about now.
I would even go further. Dave covered the First Amendment beautifully, and I think that's true, and that's something worth fighting. And I'm not going to sit here and go too on with a constitutional lawyer at the table that can say it way better than I am, or I can. There you go. But the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 9th Amendment, the 10th Amendment. These are really interesting rights that we have in the United States that are somewhat, in some ways, are completely unique to the United States. The right to bear arms is a protection, or something that's worth protecting. Legal searches and seizures, warrantless searches, that's something that a lot of people in the world would love to have. The very fact that Madison had the wisdom to write into the Bill of Rights that, just so you guys know, if a right's not written here, it doesn't mean you don't have it, is a pretty specific right worth protecting. And so it goes, the First Amendment is the foundational amendment, but we have so much to be proud of in the Bill of Rights, specifically in the United States, that makes, frankly, and I don't say this, I've been many places in the world and I've enjoyed them, so I don't say it with any level of arrogance, but like, the United States is the best place in the world specifically because of those rights.
And by the way, he doesn't just say it, he has it tattooed on his arm. So there you go, right there.
Just one quick point. I guess I would say with arrogance, this is the greatest country in the world. And for all the reasons Colin pointed out, I mean, it's worth reminding yourself and others that this is America and it has a totally different, radically different view of the individual and of freedom. It's totally unique in all of world history. And Europeans, if you don't like it, tough, TS for you. But the other point I would say is that hate speech laws aren't just an effort to control hate speech. They're an effort to control what you are allowed to think and what kind of person and how you define who you are and what your destiny is. And you can see that if you actually study the way the laws work in practice. So, I mean, they're a horrible idea, and we really need to stand against them. But thank goodness for the First Amendment.
Hi. My question is actually for Colin, because I actually work in the games industry now. And
Where do you work?
I don't know if I.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Nintendo.
What advice do you have for people who have a lot to lose? Because when I started in the industry like 10 years ago, there was actually a conservative community in the game industry. It was small, but it was there, and there's certainly a large libertarian community in the industry. And HR people, generally speaking, are much like college administrators, are not leaders. They're risk managers, and they have a tendency to fall very deeply into these traps as a part of witch hunting.
Yeah, I know all about that.
A little bit. For every witch hunt that I witness, I see a lot of people exiting on their own, just of their own accord, just because they're sick of it. And some of them, they have kids and families, but they're just interested in not dealing with the bullshit anymore, not having that risk to their career for just having normal political views.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people in this room that aren't familiar with the gaming industry like you are, like I am, it is so comically liberal that it's based in the United States largely out of San Francisco. There's good stuff in Santa Monica and LA and other places in the United States, but it has liberal ideas, and over time, in the 10 years you've been in the industry, and then I was in the industry for 14 years, like-minded people tend to hire like-minded people, which tend to hire like-minded people, and so on and so forth. And then you have this groupthink, and it is scary. I'm not sure I have an answer to your question specifically, because I think each person has to weigh those risks on their own. If you have a child, you have a mortgage, I mean, you might want to just grin and bear it. But I will say this, and this is what was so scary about the gaming industry. I became the voice for a lot of conservatives and libertarians in the industry because I wasn't afraid and I didn't care. When I worked at IGN, they were actually really great. Like they never tried to censor me or tell me to shut up, which was amazing. People would come up to me at GDC or at E3, big developers, CEOs of companies sometimes, people in QA, I've said this before, and we're like, I agree with everything you say, but I would never say it. I actually interviewed a woman once, somewhat prominent female developer, and she had told me that she was never the victim of sexism in the industry, that not in her entire career, she was never once the victim of sexism in the industry, because it's a common theme in the gaming industry that it's rampantly sexist, it's rampantly whatever. And I didn't write the story because I knew what it would do to her if I wrote that story. I was like, I'm not writing this. This would be a huge story to get hundreds of thousands of views, get picked up everywhere. It would be great for my name, but this woman's going to deal with shit for the rest of her career now because she's going to be denying everyone else's experience. So it's a very complicated industry, and I think you realize that. I think it's unlike any other industry in that regard.
I actually have a special witch hunting bank account.
Yeah, you have to. You have to. Well, well, I wish you the best, and I think for younger people that are disassociated with families, or they're kind of more transient, or they're trying things out, I hope that some of these people just frankly do die on a hill in order to make a point that the industry isn't so homogenous politically. But the fact of the matter is, it is very homogenous politically, especially in the media, and they're the ones that, I was the only conservative at the big websites. And that's how, but Trump supporters play video games too, and they don't want to be told how terrible they are all the time. So it's a very complicated thing.
Probably most of the people play Call of Duty or something.
Yeah, fair enough.
And by the way, real quick, just taking a risk. You were at my house the night before you launched your Patreon thing. You literally were saying to me it could all be over. My career could be over, and that's the exact same thing that I went through in June, where I did not know by taking this risk. So taking a risk is worth it.
Hi. So I'm a big fan of all three of you. I'm actually a game objective as a game.
All right, we know who we're going out with later. I don't know what that means.
So my question is for all three of you. In light of the WikiLeaks revelations about the CIA holding regardless true or not, what is each of your opinion on the intersection between privacy and free speech, particularly in the technological age?
We'll go this way. All right, Colin, you first.
Let me go this way. So, there are a number of issues built into the idea of privacy. So privacy has to do both with, I think it's primarily an issue of property rights and what I would call personal liberty, right? So, you don't have any privacy interest in or right for us to say or to demand that we don't tell the people that you were here with your awesomely colorful shirt, right? Because you're willing to come out in public, and that's not. But if you own the information, if you've taken steps to keep it private, that's basically yours and you own it, right? And it's like a property right or intellectual property. And I think that, so I don't know that I would call this really a free speech issue. I'd call it a liberty and property rights. And then more broadly speaking, look at the entire Bill of Rights. You have the Fourth Amendment, which prevents searches and seizures. Actually, you should watch Colin's video on the Third Amendment, because it's really relevant here, even though it's the weirdest amendment, right? But it shows that the founders cared about a man's home as his castle, and there's a certain sort of zone of privacy that is yours, and if you take steps, typically it's take steps with property and to foreclose and prevent other people from intruding into your life, you definitely have a right to prevent people from doing that. And if we violate that right, we are not only going to be violating the rights of privacy, but we'll end up chilling speech and doing all kinds of other things. So that's the kind of intersection. But let me leave it at that and see if you guys have more to say.
Yeah, well, I would say real quick on that. We've all voluntarily given up our information, right? We all are on these things. I don't know about you, but I don't keep a lawyer with me every time I update Snapchat, to go through the 3 pages of lingo. So we volunteered this stuff, and then at the same time, we know that these companies, just by the way the world works, these companies have high-level connections in politics, and they donate money. And why didn't Mark Zuckerberg for the last 5 years ago? We didn't know this at the time, but now this picture came out where he had his webcam covered on his computer and the microphone covered. He was doing it for a reason, because he knew that something was up. So unfortunately, we've kind of done this to ourselves, and I think a lot of us are trying to extricate ourselves from it. But in a certain way, it's too late unless you want to just get off the grid altogether, which I do every now and again, and it's pretty sweet, actually.
I'm conflicted and unformed on this, because I think that I look at something more high level and something more with a goal, like what Snowden did. Snowden's a patriot, right? And because he utilized secrets and exposed things that were systemic. This is the major difference I actually feel between him and Manning, where I think Manning was way more indiscriminate in what she did. So it makes me feel a little hypocritical in that way, because usually you have to be found rooted in principle. Yet if I were to judge Snowden by a principle that I otherwise would have held in terms of a person's privacy, I'd probably conflict with myself. So I think that there's probably exceptions to the rule, but on an individual level and on a governmental level, I think that it's like what was going on with Congress recently with selling of data, and that they're going to let kind of data just be sold at a high level. even if it's metadata, even if it's not anything that's useful, it's concerning. We should probably stop that before it happens. But then we have this NSA apparatus that shamelessly spies on all of us and still does, which is even more incredible because you know, some other shiny object distracted all of us. So I hope that makes sense.
Hi.
Hi. So we were doing a unit on free speech in one of my classes, and we got to hate speech. So we started talking about like controversial groups like the Westboro Baptist Church and the Skokie involving the Nazi Party. And I've noticed that one of the most common reasons cited as to why those groups' speech should be banned is for emotional distress. So I just want to know whether like severe emotional distress should be used as a justification to censor people. And my second question would be for the Nazi Party. I said that I supported the court's decision in allowing them to march because I was saying that the group was only advocating their ideas. You weren't attempting to incite any like imminent lawless action. But my professor was, I think he was only trying to provide a counterpoint. He said that the ideas they hold are inherently dangerous because they were advocating for genocide, and the only reason why the group wasn't able to implement those ideas was because they didn't have enough people. So, like usually groups like that have marches and speeches in order to gather more members. So, like, he's just trying to say like those groups like are just dangerous. Yeah. So I just wanted to know whether that's a justification to ban.
You want me to take that one?
Well, let's try a one word. We'll all say it at the same time, the word. How about that on 3? Do we agree that you can ban them?
No.
No. I was going to count to 3.
No.
Okay.
1, 2. Yeah, we're all individualists here.
Yeah, we
don't march to your rally. I think that's it.
Yeah, no. And I don't know if your teacher was playing devil's advocate or not, but no, that is a terrible idea. Just because they're out there, it doesn't mean that they are going to start multiplying their ideas. I think this is where we would all agree. Let them march. It's uncomfortable, and I know that they did it in an area where they knew a lot of Jewish people live, so they were intentionally inflaming people. But no, beat them by, guess what? Everyone, you can be out there on, you can stream it on Facebook video and show these people and show their bad ideas, but I would not be for banning them in any way.
Can I add just 2 quick points, because she asked a question about emotional distress. I don't think emotional distress alone is a justification for preventing somebody from speaking, and the idea, the Westboro Baptist case is an easy case, and the Supreme Court got it right. But if you couple emotions, sort of what you'd call it intentional infliction of emotional distress, with some form of harassment, it has to be physical. There has to be a physical component to it. And I think that's ultimately the touchstone of the difference between free speech and some sort of criminal behavior. It's got to involve either the advocacy of force against somebody or the actual use of force against somebody. And there are difficult issues. So with the Klan, just marching or just speaking out is not in itself a criminal act, although you could make a good argument that they shouldn't have been able to block the public streets, but that's kind of a different issue. But if it's an organization that the law enforcement knows is engaged in criminal activities and has a positive plan to, let's say, undermine the government of the United States or go out and murder people systematically, and they've all agreed to do that, that's a criminal conspiracy and they can be prevented. That was not the case with the Klan in Skokie. But you can think of all kinds of other groups that do fit that. I mean, actually, the American Communist Party was working with the Soviets at a time. I think they were essentially a criminal enterprise. An easier example is the mafia, right? I mean, the fact that the mafia uses speech to communicate with one another. I mean, they're still the mafia and they're a criminal enterprise. That's the touchstone of the difference between free speech and crime.
So,
Mr. Himmler, Pepe of Pakistan, who is the elected
yes, I know him well.
He wanted me to ask you if you will recognize the Pakistani genocide.
Yes, I stand with the people of Pakistan, and I recognize the genocide, and I will do everything I can to make people more aware of it.
Okay, that's serious note here.
I was being serious, but okay.
So, what I'm seeing, right now, is I think there's a serious need for, here working at Marshall, I've been kind of trained to look for patterns where you can see a market for disruption, right? I think the news media right now is one of those markets right now. People are just turned off by the media. If you look at the YouTube metrics, you see, viewership just jumping up and jumping up. And I think there's a real opportunity here for you guys. And I was wondering if you had, of course, they're fighting back with a lot of this stuff, with these baseless attacks. And Thunderfoot put out something today which I disagree with. He was saying that there's not a conspiracy, which, technically there's not a conspiracy, and I can say that's true, but just because of conspiracy doesn't mean that people can't have mutual interests and feed off each other and coordinate, if you will. Mob mentality is just, but I think in order for you guys to capitalize on this opportunity, I think you guys should join together to form something, both for like maybe trying to reach out to advertisers, and also to actually maybe make a network even, like a rational, if you consider yourself skeptical of network. And I was wondering if you guys had reached out and thought about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of discussions about that sort of thing. I'm sure we're not the only ones having them. Colin and I have been discussing something like that. It would take a tremendous amount of money. The thing with YouTube is that it's all for free. I mean, they're hosting us on their servers for free and doing all that stuff. So they take a big cut of our money, and they've made it clear that there's a political agenda that goes beyond just their money because they've cut our ads. So this is a huge problem. But there are a lot of discussions, I think, at probably high-level places all over the place, trying to figure out what the answer is there. But trust me, we're all very aware of it. I don't care where people watch or listen to me as long as they do. And if we can figure out another place that's not YouTube, that'll be fine.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, go Kyrgyzstan.
Yes.
Hi, I'm one of your supporters.
Oh,
Dave?
Oh, well, thank you. You won this one. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm a liberal, and I'm a feminist, but I'm not a crazy feminist. I don't hate men. I don't want to but I don't. I have made two of my own white Americans, so I want them to do well. They're white. And because we're talking here like with free speech, like it's the big problems are coming from the left. Now, yes, they're coming from the left. But if we're going to talk about truth, can we just talk about religion being always wrong? And then we see all these people on the right who disappear. And they are bigger than the social justice warriors who are just a few kids who think they're going to save the world, but they're not, right? So there's just a few of them. The problem is the right. The problem with science advancing is the right. We can't do stem cell research because of what the right is doing. So I'm sorry that you got offended the joke. I thought it was stupid. I mean, I kind of did too. Yeah, well, it's fine. But you got pushback from a few thousand people. We have millions on the right telling us the science is wrong. That all of it. I mean, vaccines. Well, that's from the left.
Yeah.
Big advances that we do in science. The religious right is the one that is messing up. Big time.
Well, I'm pretty sure you're not going to get any of the three of us to either defend religion or the right.
That. Like we're talking about truth. We can't have truth if the religious right is always telling us you're wrong. Look at that. You said bad ideas disappear. Well, Jesus is still around, and that's been around for 2,000 years. So he's not a Holy Spirit, but people still believe it. So maybe things do stick around.
Can I just say a couple? So I agree with you. I think thinking about issues in general of freedom and the nature of government in left-right terms is the wrong way to think about it. But I'll put it this way: they're both sides are equally bad on freedom. They both support what I would call a mixed economy, which means a mixture of freedom and controls, freedom and unfreedom, freedom and government controls. And both sides are moving more and more towards statism. Now, on different issues, they have different degrees of badness, so to speak. which is one of the reasons I don't think that you can talk about even free speech as an issue. I mean, the left is bad in certain ways. I spoke to a conservative group a while back, and my boss was there, and he spoke out in favor of immigration, and all of a sudden everybody jumped up in their chairs and started shouting him down. And one of the other guys said, "This is funny. This reminds me of a college campus in which all of the supposed snowflake leftists shout everybody down, yet you're a bunch of conservative Trump supporters doing exactly the same thing." And I've gotten the same thing. So, and I think you're right. The religious right is not in favor of free speech. They can't be in favor of free speech because ultimately, if they're in favor of free inquiry and free speech, it challenges the tenets of religion, and it all falls apart. So, I mean, I think you're right. I've said this before, I liken the left and the right to something like the Kiwanis Club versus the Rotary, the Rotary Club. It's
that's
like
a great
that.
reference.
Yeah. I'm dating myself a bit. Let's ask Colin if he knows who they are.
I know the Rotary Club. Actually, a buddy of mine's in the Rotary Club.
He knows about it from 25, 30
They sponsored my hockey
years
team
ago.
back in the day.
But I mean, my point is this, they're labels, right? And they're like clubs, they're like gangs, they're whatever you want to put it. They're just political affiliations. You have to look at people as individuals. You seem like the kind of person who's in favor of free speech and free thought. If we define the left as against free speech, you get cut out, and that's a bad idea, right? If we define it in left-right terms, we end up grouping somebody like Ayaan Hirsi Ali with religious nutballs and Sam Harris with intolerant, regressive leftists. That's crazy because they're way closer together than they are apart, right? So I think this is a real mistake to think of this in left-right terms. So I'm right with you on that, even if we disagree on it.
I'm sorry, were you going to?
Well, just real quick, I also think that the idea that it's just a couple college kids that are pushing all this stuff, it's not the case because we know this is institutional. And it's also throughout Hollywood and media and the mainstream media and cable news and all of that stuff. Trust me, I'm very aware of that. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, so I tried to figure out how real is this stuff, and it actually is real.
I have been teaching at a university for 12 years. I'm aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of professors that are like me, get over it, get offended. So what? You'll survive. So there's a lot of professors that are like me. So
good.
I just know that the left is not that dangerous. I mean, they're making a lot of noise now. No, wait.
Right.
I'm talking about
Free helicopteroids!
what?
Yeah.
No,
That's my point.
No, I mean,
That's
you're.
fine. I'll pass the.
I was just gonna say, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like, I was a registered Republican until Trump, and I left the party because he's a fucking disgrace. But to me, I voted for Kasich and then gave the finger to the party and became independent. And I think that there are. Yes, the right is pro-religion, and I'm an atheist. I've always been an atheist since I was very young, and was one of the few Republican atheists, I guess. And I also feel like, the science is being held back. Global warming is real. It is caused by man. I know that. A lot of people know that. So I agree with what you're saying. But I do agree with Dave that the left is far more dangerous than you're giving them credit for, because it reminds me of the gay marriage argument I used to make. I was pro-gay marriage in the Republican Party before a lot of Democrats were. Democrats that voted for Obama in 2008 voted against gay marriage, as a reminder. And to me, I always looked at it and I'm like, we are fighting this battle they've already lost. They've lost. Just keep going. They lost. The anti-gay people are losing. It's over. It's done. It's the same way I feel about transgender rights, where I'm like, just keep going. Just ignore them. They're going to lose. And it's the same way I feel about the anti-science stuff and the the creationism and the 5,000-year young Earth and all that kind of stuff. They're losing. It's over. Just ignore them. But the left does control media. The left does control academia. A study I think out of Harvard was saying something like 94% of college professors are liberal. So it's. And I think it was Michael Bloomberg that gave a commencement speech at Harvard, and it was like booed because he was saying like, what is going on here isn't okay. And people were like really losing their minds over it, but it's true. And but you remind me a lot of my mom because she was in academia too, and she's much like you. So there are good people fighting the good fight.
Just to clarify, my point is not right is worse, left is worse. It's the categories they're not real categories. And we need to think about people as individuals and then think about the ideas that they hold as really bad. So, if you think about it as left versus right, you're left with this binary, way of thinking that requires you to accept a host of sort of wrong ideas on both sides, and that's the mistake that people make. So I think we need to think about it more as the ideas and individuals and what the truth is rather than left-right terms.
And I think you're right too in the sense that, you know, tribalism, we were talking about tribalism, which is such a great theme. Think about the pretzel that people twisted themselves into to support Trump on the right. In what way? What way is Trump a Republican?
Yeah.
And honestly, what is he? He was pro-choice 4 years ago, and I mean, you can be all these things, you know, all those kinds of things. You know, against bombing Syria, not for bombing Syria. He's a protectionist, very Republican. He's all these, you know, he wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure spending. That's what I'm saying. Like, this man isn't a Republican. He isn't a conservative. That's why he turned me off to the party. And it goes way more towards ideology and just proving that you're right no matter what. You want to win no matter what. And I didn't want to win. I wanted them to lose.
Hey, thanks so much for coming here. So, Mr. Rubin, I watched your Prayer U University, Why Left the Left. I was wondering if you could explain that, and then also why the right is more compatible with free speech, and a lot of the classical liberal ideas that you like to talk about, and maybe touch on what classical conservatism is.
Yeah, well, my feeling basically on leaving the left, which by the way, they titled it that wasn't me, but I am glad that they did it, was really that the things that I care about most, free speech, free thought, tolerance, live and let live, limited government, and liberty, these actually are liberal ideas. They don't sound like liberal things anymore because of the way liberalism has changed over the last 20 or 30 years, but these are liberal principles. It's liberal to not care if the guy that lives next door to you marries a guy or not. That is actually liberal. By the way, it's also libertarian because you wouldn't care, the government shouldn't be involved in what those two people are doing. And I love moments like that where we've had a couple of these where we can argue things from a liberal perspective and a libertarian perspective and come up with the same resolution. That's actually pretty beautiful, and it shows why knowing political philosophy is important. What was the second part of the question?
Would you say the right is more compatible to your, maybe especially because I listen to AM radio, would you say that AM radio is more compatible to your beliefs?
I mean, I literally have not listened to AM radio since 1984, but I would say the right at the moment, and this sort of goes to what the lady was just speaking about, at the moment, I personally, in what I do, I'm finding it easier to build bridges with people on the right consistently, so that I've been able to sit down with people like Glenn Beck and Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and Larry Elder, and because the principle that we're trying to get to, we all agree on free speech, absolutely. We agree on liberty and your right to live your life for yourself. So it's easier, even if we disagree on abortion, we can disagree on gay marriage, we can disagree on specifics of taxes or foreign policy, but the basis of what we agree on, of freedom, is there. I'm having trouble finding as many people on the left with that. That may be just my case, and there are leftists for sure. Watch my show that we put up today with Mark Duplass, who's a Hollywood liberal, and I think actually he's finding it sort of hard himself, and who knows, maybe he'll be a libertarian 6 months from now. But I think basically the left, look, defending my liberal principles is now a conservative position. So whatever that makes me, you know, that's up to whoever wants to label it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're pretty much up against the clock.
So we're up, all right, so we'll do, how about we do them all in 1 minute? 1 minute answers. Can we do that? All right, here we go.
This is a quick question. Actually, first of all, I just want to say thanks. This has been super awesome. This has been a great talk. I think we all learned a lot.
Thanks.
That's one question. For Dave, have you gotten a chance to really dive into Uncharted?
I have. Now you're really putting me on the spot. The first thing I did was Colin got me a PS4. I downloaded Altered Beast from that was the
game is so terrible.
I'm playing. What's the game I'm playing? Air Force something or other. Some kind of. There's my video game lawyer back there. Yeah, I haven't yet. I got Ultimate Alliance or.
Marvel Ultimate Alliance.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
he's not ready to play.
Oh yeah. Small steps. He's going to walk me through it. Right.
My name is Miles. Thank you all for coming. I was at Cal State LA when Ben Shapiro was blocked from speaking, and I recorded the event and did an article about it. And I interviewed some of my other professors, and they fear that, even though I don't think we're there yet, that if we continue having ideological groups that separate themselves from the whole, just like you talked about, Colin, with 1920s Germany, the brown shirts it stopped free speech. They believe it could be a possibility for civil war if we don't stop this and we allow diversity of ideas to be places just like USC. So what is your take on how we could stop things like that happening. So.
I mean, we had 1861 and 1865. The only Civil War was awful, and for people that have never read about it or whatever, it is disgustingly violent. People should go read about it. And we almost had a civil war during the War of 1812 as well, during the Hartford Convention, and people can go read about that. I don't think it's possible. I think if for some reason, and I don't know if the guys agree, but if for some reason we couldn't come to some sort of agreement over time, right? Like a new constitutional convention or something, even something very radical like that. I think that people would probably split off amicably, and I think it would end up in multiple countries. The reason I say that is because there's nothing that binds any of these people together. The preservation of slave economics was the reason that the Confederacy seceded, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. And they all happen to be clumped together. California, Oregon, and Washington have a lot in common with some of New York and Virginia and a few other places, but what about everyone else, and how do you split it up? So I don't think violent civil war is even possible in the United States, but I could be wrong.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say one of the biggest free speech issues in the last couple of years has been the Colin Kaepernick issue and choosing to kneel during the national anthem. And irrespective of how you feel about that, I'm a liberal myself. I thought it was a little ridiculous and overblown. But I'm curious if you're willing to as rigorously defend Colin Kaepernick's right to free speech as you would someone like Milo or Ann Coulter.
Oh yeah, 100%.
An equivalency between the 49ers fans who's burning his jersey as like the guys that are forming human shields outside college campuses.
Yeah, well, 100%. I would defend Colin the same way I would defend Colin Kaepernick and this Colin, but yeah, I would defend him the same way I would defend Milo. You can check my tweets when it was happening. I mean, 100%. And I would defend the people that want to burn his jersey. Guess what? You can burn his jersey too. That you can't burn him, but you can burn his jersey.
I made fun of him when he was doing it, but I protected his, because I think it was silly, like you said, but I also protect his right to do it. And I also think that he is absolutely suffering from punitive damage now in the NFL, because he's certainly better than a lot of quarterbacks that are being signed.
Okay, so I've watched the Rubin Report a whole bunch of times. I really like the show. You know, having listened to everything you guys have said thus far, I'm assuming that you're all in favor of, make sure I get this right and keep it short, fiscal responsibility, saving tax money, helping the economy. You guys are all in favor of all that, right? So there's this bill called HR 3300, which is supported by the Dollar Coin Alliance and John McCain, who was on your show. And it's basically remove the $1 bill from circulation, replace it with a coin like they've done in Canada and Europe, and save billions and billions of dollars. Is there any good reason we shouldn't all be fighting like hell for this?
I personally don't think it's an issue, because we should probably slash the military budget in half and deal with Social Security and Medicare and the things that actually cost money. Saving a few $1 billion it might as well save nothing. But I mean that's my stance. Why not lop off, say, $400 billion a year from the military budget, and then we can have a conversation. But that's my take.
What about the big bomb we dropped today?
That was a pretty cool bomb. It was a pretty cool bomb.
Yeah, I don't know enough about this specific to comment directly. Okay.
Hi, I'm a graduate student in the sciences, and unfortunately I can say what Colin's study he cited is very much true. It's very much full of the progressive left, lots of liberals. It's really hard to say your opinion all the time, as I'm sure you've heard from lots of different people emailing you. Sometimes I feel like instead of trying to say my view, I should instead hide it until I get a more secure position. Maybe down the line, cross my fingers, if I got tenure, be professor at a nice university, and then maybe my opinions would have a better impact. Do you think that strategy is better, or if it's better to just say screw it, I'm just going to say how I am, I might get a worse job, but I'm going to spend the next 10 years at least saying what I really think?
It depends on how much you want to mitigate risk. And I also say that even if you're tenured and respected, it can still blow back on you. Look what happened to those guys at Yale during the Halloween costume fiasco. They were still out. So I think you have to stand on your principles personally.
Yeah, and I'll just go one step further and say we need you now. You know what I mean? Like, we're just a couple people that happen to be doing this. We need allies, as everyone fighting for anything they believe in needs. So yeah, I mean, it'll be a lot worse in 10 years, but we'll take you in 10 years if you need to wait that long. Yeah.
So we've been talking mostly about free speech in the public space and in the political world and in the social world, but how do we combat, if we need to, in the, I guess, in the employer world, how do these rights change in the private space? Like that one guy who asked the question, or said that he was gonna rebel using the pronoun. For some companies, he might lose his job for that. It might be considered harassment. And yeah, some people don't want to say what company they work for because they're afraid of speaking their mind and losing their job. So I was just curious about how the difference between using or exercising our freedom of speech in the public space versus the private space.
Yeah, I mean, it comes with consequences. It's as simple as that. You may want to use the pronouns you want, but a private company can tell you not to.
Yeah,
and if they can get rid of you for that, I don't think there's a way of, I wouldn't want the government to come in and say that they can't do it. So it just kind of sucks.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's true. I agree with that.
All right, finish strong.
Yeah, so bringing it back to colleges, Colin mentioned earlier how most people in academia are on the left. What advice would you have for a student who would feel compelled to self-censor themselves because a professor that's on the left treats disputable evidence as fact and kind of silences their students into intimidation under the guise of intellectualism? Like, because I'm hiding behind these degrees, I'm automatically right and you're automatically wrong. Because I'm just thinking about, I was in a class called social justice. I'm in it right now.
Oh man.
Yeah, can I come with you next time?
I brought up the issue of multiculturalism and just certain values being incompatible with Western values, and my professor or my TA was just like, "That's stupid," and that's it. That's stupid, and you're disingenuous, and here's why. And I just want to know, like, what advice you would have.
Wait, there's literally a class called social justice? That's
It's
actual.
called social justice and freedom. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they go together.
I think we really got it.
Yeah, okay, all right, we were gonna wrap. I mean, really, it's the perfect way to end this thing, I think, which is that we need you guys now. If you believe what you're saying and you've done your research and all that, we need you. This will only be worse. For any of you that think that this thing is getting better, yeah, there are some wins. What happened to Colin is a win. But we need you guys now. So at the end of the day, like, yeah, I guess you could kind of keep your mouth closed and get a better grade. And you'll probably go do something great with your life either way, but we need people like you to be out there because we're all just people, just trying to do something. And on that note, thank you guys all for coming out.
Cycle. That's tribal warfare ultimately. And we really got to break through this, and we really have to, confidently defend the idea that, look, truth is the ultimate arbiter, reason is the ultimate arbiter. We've got to talk about this. We've got to be able to rely on our ability to talk, our ability to think, and our ability to solve our disputes peacefully.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that what it leaves you with, if you don't use those things, is that what it leaves you with is violence. If you've pinned all of your intellectual opponents into a box and, well, everyone I disagree with is a racist or a bigot or a homophobe. I mean, we saw this happen on Inauguration Day when Richard Spencer, who's the alt-right guy, who I probably disagree with on 99% of the issues out there, the guy got punched, and a ton of people were thrilled about it, and saying, well, you should be out there punching Nazis like we're in Indiana Jones. And this is not the right response.
No, it's not. And by the way, just as an aside, that's the person I want you to interview most on your show. I've only listened to him speak once. I found a radio interview with him, and I'm like, I didn't know anything about him. I'm like, this guy is bizarre. I'd love to hear you pick him apart.
Well, thank you for mentioning that publicly. That won't put me under any Okay.
But yeah, so the Richard Spencer thing, and particularly what happened in D.C. With the inauguration, I thought was it was awful. Not only what happened, but the reaction to it, because you can't let things like this occur and have people have this random definition of what a Nazi is or what a fascist is. I mean, a good example is these anti-fascist guys that are so proud and so clever that they wear masks because they're pussies, and what basically happens is that they are the ones that define the battle. They're the ones that define the targets. And I'm concerned about that because it's funny, when you don't read history and you don't know what you're talking about, you don't realize that you are acting like brown shirts. And these are the tactics that the Nazis, before they came to power in the mid-20s and late 20s, particularly when Hitler got out of prison, these are the tactics that the brown shirt fascists use to silence people. The anti-fascists are acting like fascists. And as the old saying goes, fascism will come to America under the name of anti-fascism. So I am concerned about the definitions, and that's why I go back to square one. I go back to the base, and I say, with free speech, anything goes. With the ability to be right or wrong, anything goes. It goes back to the argument we had about the Confederate flag, or even someone had asked me about, can a person fly a swastika outside their house? I'm like, yeah, of course. It's in bad taste. You're able to ridicule them. Mm-hmm. I don't think you're allowed to go pull it down. You're allowed to write a story about them. You're allowed to put news vans outside their house and shame them if you want. But that's that person's right. And it's the same argument that was having with the Confederate flag, where my stance was, this is a deplorable symbol of slavery and of traitors. But if you want to fly it, more power to you, because we can't begin to define what is offensive and then expect that that's not going to blow back on us one day as well, when the reasonable people that are being called fascists are now fascists in the minds and in the hearts of the very brave ninja suit wearing people that go to these things.
Right, and by the way, the whole thing happened with the Confederate flag, and the resolution was that TV Land took Dukes of Hazzard reruns off. Literally, that's what happened. I mean, that, as if this is protecting an idea.
Suddenly it's offensive to everyone, by the way. The Civil War ends at Appomattox in April 1865. Reconstruction ends 1876. Jim Crow goes on until the Civil Rights Act, and then and segregation, Brown versus Board, and then 50 years later, after that, now it's offensive.
Yeah.
I mean, and that goes back to what you were saying, which was,
I am the president of Young Americans for Liberty, the USC chapter.
And I'm Nick Solari, and I'm the treasurer of the student chapter of YAL here at USC.
So basically, we just wanted to help the Ayn Rand Institute sponsor today's event because we feel free speech is an important issue, especially on the contemporary college campus. College is obviously sort of a place for learning new ideas, so free speech is an important element to the college campus.
Exactly. As a Center for Education, we just wanted to make sure that open discourse was as much a part of the experience as a professor's lecture. And I'm really looking forward to tonight. It should be a great time.
Hi, so we're here at USC for a free speech event, and to my left is Colin Moriarty. He's I would call him a YouTube sensation, but he can speak for himself. I think this is going to be a really cool event. Dave Rubin will be here, host of the Rubin Report, and we're really looking forward to a great conversation on free speech. I actually think this will be a super cool audience that is really engaged in the issues. I think these are people who want to learn about this issue, learn about what's going on, and learn about people who are on the front lines of debates about free speech, like Colin. So let me turn it over to Colin. Give him a moment to say a couple things. So
I mean, it's good to be at USC or at any college campus in the United States because, I graduated college at Northeastern 10 years ago, and I feel like college campuses today are unrecognizable. At least that's what you read online, and you see videos and you see protests, the stuff that was going on at Yale with the Halloween costume, for instance. I want to really encourage people to explore difficult ideas, to have, difficult conversations, and really consider both sides of the argument, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different sides of the argument, and not shut anything out, not shut anything down. Even these difficult things, these maybe even offensive things. We don't want to offend anyone. I'm so happy to be here at USC. I'm so honored that you guys invited me to be here, and I really think we're gonna have a great time.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. It's good to be here. I understand we're at some sort of alt-right, far-right meeting. Is that correct? Some sort of white supremacy thing. We're looking forward to it, and I have to say, a nice, diverse group, considering. This is very exciting. I was supposed to speak, actually, at USC a couple weeks ago, and they couldn't secure it or something, apparently, because of my past controversial statements. And I just want to so let me just get it out of the way right to start. I do, and I really mean this, I really do believe that Sega Genesis is better than Super Nintendo. And I don't care what any of you think. I stand by that. All right. This is very exciting. Okay, so free speech, but before I begin real quick, the university did give me a list of topics that we're allowed to talk about. So let's see what we got here. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about free speech, and we'll take some questions from you guys at the end. So first I want to kick it to you guys, and let's just talk about the basics of free speech at the moment. The fact that we even have to do something like this these days seems sort of ridiculous. Just to, I have a feeling we're not going to say anything that controversial here. Maybe we can come up with something.
I might.
You might? You're ready? You radical right here.
I have a few jokes about women if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they ban you from Twitter yet?
No, give it time.
Give it time. You can't harm somebody, but you have a private right to do that, even if we find it reprehensible or we don't like it. What do we do to get rid of the power that these words have over us? Because that's what I think a lot of these guys are dealing with. Because I get emails every day from college kids who are like, I'm just afraid to say what I think, or I don't want to tell my professor what I think, or I posted something and now my mom won't talk to me, like all this. I wish that was my problem. What?
Yeah, so
how do we take the power away from those words, basically?
I mean, part of what we'd have to do ultimately is we have to embrace the idea of reason and individualism, and we have to be willing to think and evaluate things. And I think fundamentally what's going on behind all of this is a real attack on what I would call the Enlightenment values of reason and individualism, the idea that we can all think, we can formulate our own conclusions, we're all in charge of our own destiny, the pursuit of happiness, right? That's in the Declaration of Independence. It's part of this whole idea that we're individuals and we pursue our own destiny. We all decide what is true. It doesn't mean whatever comes out of our head is true. It does mean we have to have the right to think, evaluate the world, and really figure out what is true. Against that, you have a kind of, historically and philosophically speaking, there's a kind of counter-Enlightenment trend. It's against the idea of reason. It's against the idea of individualism. And in favor of this idea of that leads to a sort of emotionalism. To be more concrete about it, you see this in multiculturalism. You see this in the intersectionality now. There's many different manifestations of this idea. You can see it in collectivism. I think it's breeding a kind of tribalism, right? And that you're seeing on both sides, in my view. Like you saw it in what we typically refer to as PC, is this idea that in multiculturalism, it's this idea that we are all separated by and you can fill in the blank, our skin color, our race, our ethnicity, our sex, our national origin, our religion, on and on and on. And and you can really find this in if you actually read the philosophers who are behind this, they really believe that all of these groups are isolated from one another. They're in a kind of inherent warfare against one another, and they simply can't talk to each other. There's a gulf between them. There is no ability to speak to one another, which is really it's a horrifying idea, because when you reject the idea that we can reason with one another, that I can understand your situation, that we can come to a mutual agreement about what the facts are and what is true, if you reject that, the only thing left is force. The only thing left is this kind of intersectional conflict. And to circle back to the whole Trump phenomenon, part of the reason I think that people didn't see that is they didn't want to see it, first of all. They didn't want to, and if you look at this as sort of the leftist media, although I'm not a huge fan of defining this as left-right, but we can talk about that. It's this idea that we can sort of control the debate. We can order people to live their lives in a particular way, and there'll be no blowback from that whatsoever. And I think what you saw with the Trump election is a whole lot of people, number one, getting really pissed off at the idea that they're being ordered to conform or be intimidated into living a particular type of lifestyle. Even if it's a lifestyle I disagree with and think is stupid, they have a right to live it that way. But it's also this idea that inherently our identity is part of some group, right? And you got to find some group. And I think what we saw during the Trump election was, okay, look, if collectivism or tribalism is really the rule, my group is going to be white middle-class people, and that guy speaks for me, and I'm not going to be on the bottom, I'm going to be on the top. And I mean, that's a horrifying...
Give it time. So, all right, well, actually, that's a good place to start with this. So let's start with Colin. You tweeted one of the most offensive things I've ever read in my entire life. I don't want to butcher it for you. What was the exact tweet?
I think it was peace and quiet, hashtag a day without a woman.
Pretty offensive, right? I mean, pretty offensive. Yeah, he's freaking out. So you tweet this, gets, I don't know, a couple thousand retweets, then the outrage brigade jumps in.
Yes. I come from, or I hailed from, the very liberal, comically liberal video game industry. Since I was 18, I was writing professionally, and when I graduated college at 22, I got a full-time job, and I ascended the ranks to senior editor at IGN, which is the biggest video game website in the world, and then left to do some stuff with my friends on YouTube called Kinda Funny. And when I tweeted, oh, thank you. I don't work there anymore. When I
took all their Patreon money.
So when I tweeted out the joke, it was, I had built up a reputation in the gaming industry, especially because I was a bigger name in media, of being conservative, openly conservative and openly libertarian. It was basically just an opportunity to jump on me. No one was offended by the joke. The joke's funny. The joke's also kind of true. So that's really kind of my, it's a very nascent journey actually right now. That's when you and I met and became BFFs and all that. So yeah, scary kind of times that we live in right now.
Yeah, so basically for those of you playing along at home, Colin ultimately sort of had to or voluntarily stepped down from the company that you helped create. Now, you don't have a problem with that, with the outrage brigade, right? They're entitled to use their free speech to counter your free speech. That's what it's all about.
Sure.
But there is some sort of risk, right, in this endless fight over trying to shame and silence everybody?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's risks. The big risk is self-censorship, I think. And I mean, we're living in a culture that is offended by everything. And I don't think that that's some, that people are more sensitive than they were in the olden days. I think there's a whole lot behind this that has to do with the prevalent ideas in the culture and a lot of the ways that people, things that college kids are taught, and maybe get into that more. But I mean, think about, so let's move, or if you don't mind, I'll move from Colin's situation, which was bad, and there's lots to say about Colin's situation and the way he dealt with it in particular, which I'd love to talk about more because I think he's a model of exactly what you do in a situation like this. But let's move to sort of college, what's happening in college campuses. I mean, we've seen, attacks on speakers. The most recent one, Heather McDonald, right, at Claremont McKenna, for writing a book, War on Cops. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think she's a very bright person. I'm going to say thumbs up on that. Somebody's saying thumbs down, and anytime somebody says thumbs down, I automatically will say thumbs up. But she's bright, right? That's the bottom line. And so think about, like, there's a protest. They won't let people in the building, and the attitude basically is you're opposing a kind of orthodoxy that's developed in this culture, and we're going to shut you down. We don't want to hear from you at all. And we've moved beyond the kind of offensive, outrage to now, physical intrusions of people's speech and shutting people down. And so if you think about what's the combined effect of all of that, who in their right mind, who's not as courageous as somebody like Heather McDonald, is going to challenge the arguments that the Black Lives Matter movement are making, or any other movement? And that's not to take a side in the issue. I mean, we could talk about it if we want to, but it doesn't ultimately matter. The issue is we need to think about claims that are being made in a society that are fundamental and important to our political system, to our rights, and we need to be able to hear from people with different perspectives. And if we have this view that we're going to shame a guy like Colin and try to intimidate him, and then everybody apologizes, of course, not you, thankfully, and then we're going to physically block people for speaking, we're going to get to a point where orthodoxy takes over. Everybody knows I'm not going to take a risk about that. I'm not going to risk losing my job. I'm not going to risk being attacked. I'm not going to risk alienating my coworkers and being alienated from them. And that's how free speech dies.
So with that in mind, we're at a college right now. I realized that we didn't issue any trigger warnings before we started this thing. So just FYI, behind that door over there is a room full of puppies. If we say anything that offends you, you can roll around with some puppies, then come out when you're ready. So you make a couple interesting points there, because one of the things that happened after your little fiasco was that the International Business Times, this is a legit, or supposedly legit news organization, they wrote an article about your tweet, and they called it racist. Could you repeat the tweet again? Because maybe I'm a little slow.
That's peace and quiet, hashtag a day without a woman.
Yeah.
Which is sexist maybe, but certainly not racist. Yeah, that was the disappointing thing about it, was everyone, they couldn't even keep their words together at this point. This is what we were talking about when we had dinner the other night, which was, like, they're so eager to criticize it, they want to crucify you, right? And so they just, it was probably an honest mistake, but this guy probably writes these stories every day about how someone's offending something, so he's like, oh, it's a racist tweet. And the unfortunate thing is that was up for 24 hours. That's going to live in like LexisNexis and on Google Cache and stuff forever. And that's not true. I've never said anything racist. And I would contend that my tweet wasn't even sexist. And back to your original point, like I think that it's totally appropriate for people to be upset about what I said, right? Not every joke's funny. It wasn't even really a funny joke. It's like a Married with Children joke. It's a shitty, All in the Family joke. Like, that's fine, but to me, it's about degrees and kind of having commensurate kind of responses. They came out to destroy me, and it was agenda driven because of all the things I had said and done. I mean, I was writing about political correctness in video games and doing videos about them, and protecting the freedom of expression when games like 6 Days of Fallujah, which was about the Iraq War, was canceled. Well into development, millions of dollars spent on it because it was offensive, because it was too current. And I was the one in 2010, 2011, 2012 writing about this stuff. So I had a target on my back for a long time, and that's why I know that it was agenda driven. But to the point we were making before, we saw the evidence of this silence and this chilling effect in the election. Everyone was under this illusion that Donald Trump had no chance because people were afraid to admit that they supported him. Because if they did, they would be labeled a bigot or a sexist or a Nazi, or they're Richard Spencer's best friend, or whatever it happens to be. And if you lop California off and just count the other 49 states, Donald Trump would have comfortably won the popular vote, in addition to winning the electoral vote. And so we saw that play out in our own polity. We see that with the idea of the shy Tory in Britain. This idea that Brexit had no chance, that the conservative movement in Britain with Theresa May had no chance because everyone's afraid to talk or be honest. If you're not part of the PC brigade, they don't want to hear from you. And so the chilling effect is real.
Yeah, so those words, the racist, bigot, homophobe, Islamophobe, all of these words, at this point they're creating a backlash now. And what I don't want to see is, I don't want actual bigotry out there. You have a right to say, you actually have a right to be a bigot too.